The room is dark, not pitch black. There is a faint glow from somewhere, the kind that slips under a door or finds a gap in the curtain. Just enough light to see that the ceiling is still there, that the walls are still where they were. You are lying down. Your body is tired. You can feel that, the weight of it pressing into whatever is beneath you, the small aches that you have been carrying all day without noticing. They are noticeable now. Your mind, though, your mind has not gotten the message. It is still running, still moving through the day, still rehearsing what was said and what should have been said, and what tomorrow requires. Still sorting, cataloguing, worrying at things the way a tongue worries at a loose tooth. This is a very old problem. Marcus Aurelius knew it. He was born in 121 AD into a Rome that never stopped demanding things of him. By the time he became emperor in 161 AD, he was governing the largest empire the Western world had ever known. Millions of people, dozens of wars, constant political intrigue, plague. If anyone had reason to lie awake at night with a mind that would not stop, it was him. And yet, he developed something, not a trick, not a technique exactly, something closer to a discipline, a way of training the mind to find its own quiet from the inside out. He wrote about it not in grand philosophical treatises, but in private notes, small, careful sentences. The book we now call The Meditations was never meant for you. It was a conversation with himself, a daily practice of returning to what mattered. He called the place he returned to the Inner Citadel. Tonight, we find it together, not by forcing the mind to stop, not by arguing it into submission, but by following Marcus slowly, one chapter at a time, through the discipline he built over a lifetime of noise and obligation and loss. Let your shoulders drop a little. Feel the weight of your body where it rests. You do not need to follow every word tonight. Some chapters you will hear, some will find you while you sleep. Either way, the ideas will be here. There is something Marcus discovered, not about silence as the absence of sound, but about silence as the presence of something else entirely. Something that has always been inside you, waiting. We will come back to that. By the time this night is over, it will have a name. But first, the noise. Because before you can understand what Marcus was reaching for, you need to understand what he was reaching away from, what the noise actually is. Why it takes up so much space. And why, this is the part most people miss, it cannot be conquered by fighting it. Let your jaw soften. There is nothing required of you in the next few hours except to breathe and listen. The gate is open. We begin. Chapter 2. Why Noise Owns the Mind. There is a word Marcus Aurelius used in the Meditations that translators often render as impression. In Greek, it is phantasia. An impression is what happens the moment any sensation, a sound, a memory, an image enters your awareness. Before you have thought anything about it, before you have responded. It arrives and it lands, and for one brief instant it is simply there, unexamined. That interval between arrival and response, is where almost everything happens. Consider what your mind has been doing since you lay down. A sound outside, a thought about tomorrow, a memory that surfaced without invitation. Each one arrived as an impression. And then, almost instantly, almost automatically, your mind did something with it, named it, categorized it, attached a feeling, built a story around it. That is the noise, not the thing itself. The story your mind built around the thing. Marcus wrote in Book 5 of the Meditations that it is not events which disturb us, but our judgments about events. He was drawing on Epictetus, the philosopher who shaped much of his thinking. Epictetus, who had been born enslaved in approximately 50 AD in Hierapolis, in what is now Turkey, wrote in his Enchiridion, "Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things." A small formulation, an enormous idea. Think of the last thing that kept you awake, not the event itself, the conversation, the bill, the diagnosis, the silence where an answer should have been. Think of what your mind did with it, the interpretations it layered on, the futures it projected, the past events it recruited as evidence. The noise was never the event. The noise was the mind insisting on explaining the event to itself over and over, as if this time the explanation would finally be enough. It is never enough, because explanation is not what the mind actually needs. Thomas, an accountant in his mid-50s, described it to his doctor this way. He said that every night at around 2 a.m, he mentally reviewed everything he owed. Every debt, every obligation, every apology he had never made. He said the list was not rational. He knew that. He could tell himself during the day that most of the debts were imaginary or already settled. But at night, the list ran anyway. His mind was not doing arithmetic. His mind was trying to feel in control, and the noise it made in the attempt was exhausting. Marcus would have recognized Thomas immediately. He wrote in Book 9 of the Meditations about the man who cannot sleep because he cannot stop evaluating, who measures everything, his actions, other people's actions, the state of the empire, against some invisible standard, and finds it all, always, slightly short. The noise is the measurement. It is the mind's insistence that if it can just find the right equation, the right explanation, the right story, then peace will follow. It does not follow. Peace is not at the end of the explanation. It is in the pause before the explanation begins. Let your breath move on its own for a moment. Notice that you are breathing, that it is happening without your effort, that something in you already knows how to rest. That knowledge is not in your thoughts, it is in your body. The noise can only own the mind that has forgotten there is something beneath the noise. Marcus spent his life remembering. We are getting close to what he found there. But first, we need to understand how he learned to look. Chapter 3, The Ancient Method of Attention. Marcus Aurelius did not invent Stoicism. He inherited it. The tradition began around 300 BC with a man named Zeno of Citium, who taught philosophy from a painted porch, a Stoa, in Athens. The name stuck. From Zeno, the ideas passed through Cleanthes and Chrysippus, through Cicero and Seneca, through Epictetus, and finally to Marcus, who became its last great practitioner and its most intimate recorder. What the Stoics understood about the mind was, in essence, this: you cannot control what enters it, but you can train your response to what enters. That training had a name: prososh, usually translated as attention. But not attention in the modern sense, the frantic, scanning, distracted kind. Prososh was something more deliberate. It was the practice of watching your own mind as it moved, not to stop it, to see it clearly. This is the ancient method, and it is almost exactly opposite to what most people try at night when the noise begins. Most people try to silence the noise by redirecting attention away from it. They scroll. They put on something to watch. They try to think about something else. This works for approximately 12 minutes. Then the noise returns, often louder, because now it has been suppressed and is aware of having been suppressed. Marcus tried something different. In the Meditations, Book 4, he describes a practice of examining each impression as it arises, not reacting to it, not suppressing it, examining it, asking, is this within my control or is it not? Is this thought about what is real or about what I fear might be real? Is this moment calling for action or for the simple recognition that it exists? Pierre Hadot, the French philosopher who spent decades studying Marcus Aurelius and published his great study, The Inner Citadel, in 1992, described this practice as a kind of spiritual exercise. Not spiritual in the religious sense, in the sense of something you do repeatedly with intention that reshapes how you inhabit your own mind. The word Hadot used was askesis, practice, training, the same word athletes use. You do not become a runner by deciding to run. You become a runner by running repeatedly over time until the body knows what to do before the mind catches up. Marcus was doing the same thing with attention, not deciding to be calm, practicing attention, each morning, each evening, until the calm arose naturally from the practice. Helena, a retired schoolteacher, described something similar without knowing she was echoing Marcus Aurelius. She said that for most of her adult life, she fell asleep by going through the events of the day in her mind, evaluating each one, good day or bad day, good choices or poor ones. This worked when she was younger. The evaluation finished and she slept. As she aged, the evaluation stopped finishing. There was always one more thing, one more question. Then, after her husband died, someone suggested she try something different. Not evaluating the events of the day, but simply naming them. Not good or bad, just this happened, then this, then this. Like a recording, not a judgment. The first night she tried it, she fell asleep before she reached noon. She had stumbled, alone, into something very close to prosoche. The difference between evaluation and observation is the difference between noise and silence. Marcus Aurelius spent a lifetime learning that difference. We have all night to feel what it means. The philosopher Iris Murdoch, writing at Oxford in the 1970s, described attention as a moral act. Not because it leads to virtue, but because it is itself a kind of virtue, the willingness to see what is actually there rather than what you expect to find, to observe without immediately imposing an interpretation, to be, however briefly, genuinely present to what is in front of you. She was describing prososche in different language. And here, at this hour, with the day completed and the demands suspended, prososche is available not as a discipline, but almost as a natural condition. The mind, when it has exhausted its evaluations, sometimes arrives at observation all on its own. Let your mind do whatever it is doing right now. Do not ask it to stop. Just notice that it is happening. You are not your thoughts. You are the one watching them. And the one watching has always been quieter than the thoughts themselves. Hold that gently. We return to it. Chapter 4. Anxiety and false impressions. The Stoics had a technical name for the thought that causes suffering when it did not need to. They called it a false impression, a fantasia that the mind has accepted as true without testing it. Not a lie, exactly, more like an unexamined assumption that has been allowed to run the show. At 2 a.m, the mind runs mostly on false impressions. The thought that tomorrow will unfold exactly as badly as you fear it will. The thought that the silence from someone you care about means what you think it means. The thought that the one mistake you are replaying was as catastrophic as it felt in the moment. The thought that you are as far behind as the internal accounting says you are. None of these have been tested. They are impressions, vivid, emotionally charged, entirely persuasive, that have not yet been held up to the light. Marcus wrote about this with unusual precision. He understood that the mind does not merely receive impressions, it manufactures them. It takes something that happened, a tone of voice, an unanswered message, a number on a page, and constructs an entire narrative around it. The narrative feels like a fact. It is not a fact. It is a story the mind told itself in the space between the event and the explanation. In Book 8 of the Meditations, he wrote something that sounds almost therapeutic in its clarity. Ask yourself at every moment, is this necessary? Not, is it true? Not, is it good or bad? Is it necessary? Does this thought serve something real, or is it simply motion, the mind staying busy because busyness feels like safety? The anxiety at night almost always fails that test. Epictetus, who taught Marcus's teacher Rusticus, had a similar framework. He described anxiety as the result of wanting things to be different from how they are. Not wanting them to change, that is action, and action is appropriate. But wanting the present moment to be different while doing nothing to change it. That wanting, that gap between how things are and how you need them to be, is where the anxiety lives. It is a small room. Most people do not realize they are in it until they have been there for years. Richard, a retired engineer in his early 60s, described the moment he realized his anxiety had no object. He had spent 40 years as an anxious man. He believed the anxiety was about things, the project, the children, the health concern, the financial question. One evening, sitting with his wife after the children had moved out and the career had ended and the health question had been resolved, he realized he still felt it. The same low hum, the same background tension, the same impression that something needed attending to. There was nothing left that needed attending to. The anxiety had survived every solution, because it was never about the things. It was a habit of mind, a false impression that had been taken seriously for so long it had become the water he swam in. Marcus would not have been surprised. He wrote in Book 5 that we must regularly audit what we take to be given, not what is uncomfortable or challenging, the given, the background assumptions, the thoughts that arrive before we are awake enough to question them. This is not a comfortable practice. Asking whether the thing you have organized your whole nervous system around is real, that is not comfortable, but it is honest. And Marcus valued honesty above almost everything. Not self-flagellating honesty, not confessional, just clear-eyed. The kind that can look at a false impression and say, "I see you. I see that you are not what you claim to be. You do not need to leave. But you do not have to drive. Let your shoulders drop. Feel the weight of your body where it presses into the surface below you. Your body has no anxiety. The anxiety lives in the story. And the story, right now, is not necessary." Chapter 5. The Inner Citadel. There is a phrase in the Meditations that Marcus returned to so often it became a kind of personal architecture. To hegemonicon, the ruling faculty, the part of the mind that, when trained, remains untouched by everything the world throws at it. Pierre Hadot, in his Decades of Translation and Commentary, rendered this concept as the inner citadel, a fortress inside consciousness, not a place you go to hide, a place you go to be. The image is worth sitting with for a moment. A citadel is not a room. It is a structure that has been built and fortified stone by stone over time. It has walls not because the world outside is evil, but because the world outside is loud and unstable and does not always distinguish between what is yours and what it can take. The walls are not about fear, they are about clarity. Inside the citadel, you can think. Outside, you are at the mercy of every impression that arrives. Marcus, as emperor, was surrounded by advisors, petitioners, generals, senators, and sycophants from the moment he woke until the moment he found his tent or his study and closed the door. He had almost no privacy. He had every material thing Rome could provide, and he wrote in the Meditations that none of it was the thing he actually needed. The thing he actually needed was this, a point inside himself that could not be moved by the noise. He described it in Book 4 with the image of a rock in the sea. Waves arrive. Some are small, some enormous. The rock does not move, not because it is rigid, because its foundation runs deep enough that the surface motion cannot reach it. That foundation, for Marcus, was practice, the daily work of examining impressions, choosing responses deliberately, returning again and again to what was actually true versus what merely felt true in the moment. The Scottish philosopher Donald Robertson, who has written extensively about Stoic cognitive therapy in his 2019 book, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, draws a direct line between Marcus's Inner Citadel and modern cognitive behavioral therapy. The same essential structure: identify the thought, examine the thought, choose whether to act on the thought. Not with aggression, with the calm curiosity of someone who has learned that thoughts are not facts. Here is what the Inner Citadel is not. It is not numbness. A person who has retreated from feeling has not found their inner citadel. They have just found a different kind of noise, a suppressed one, which is more dangerous. It is not detachment. Marcus cared deeply about Rome, about his family, about the men who died in his wars. The meditations are full of grief and effort and love. None of that was abandoned in pursuit of inner calm. It is not certainty. The citadel is not a place you go because you have figured everything out. It is a place you maintain precisely because everything has not been figured out and never will be. It is simply this: a practice of not being driven by whatever arrived most recently, not being ruled by the loudest impression, returning again and again to the ruling faculty, to the part of you that watches and chooses and remains. You have something like this already. You have always had it. It is the part of you right now that is aware of your breathing, not doing anything about it, just aware. The watcher beneath the noise. That is the citadel. We have been inside it this whole time. Something shifts here. The rest of tonight is about learning its rooms. Chapter 6, Training Desire to Rest. There is a habit of mind so common it has become invisible. The habit of wanting to feel differently than you do. At night, it shows up like this. You want to be calm, you are not calm. You want to be sleepy, you are not sleepy. You want the thoughts to stop, they are not stopping. And the wanting, the gap between what is and what you need, becomes its own source of agitation. Marcus Aurelius understood this as one of the primary mechanisms of suffering, not the difficulty itself, the wanting the difficulty to be something other than what it is. He had a name for the practice of releasing that wanting. He called it amor fati, though he borrowed the concept from the broader Stoic tradition, and it was Friedrich Nietzsche, writing 17 centuries later in Twilight of the Idols, who gave it that Latin formulation, the love of fate. Not the acceptance of fate, not the resignation to fate, the love of it. This is worth sitting with, because it sounds harder than it is. To love what is happening does not mean to prefer it. You do not have to prefer a sleepless night. You do not have to prefer the difficult thing that happened today, or the uncertainty that is sitting at the edge of your awareness right now. What it means is this: for this moment, this breath, This instant. What is happening is what is happening. The wanting it to be different costs energy you do not have. The acceptance of it costs nothing. And in the space where the wanting used to be, something quieter can live. Epictetus taught something adjacent to this. He wrote in the Discourses that we must learn to align our desires with what is within our power, to want what we can have. And the most fundamental thing we can have, the only thing no external force can take, is our own response to the present moment. The desire to feel differently than you feel right now is a desire for something outside your control. The moment is what it is. Your response to the moment, that is yours. Adam, a man in his late 50s who had spent most of his life in high-stakes work, described the first time he understood this. He was lying awake after a professional failure, replaying it, trying to feel differently, trying to feel less responsible, less embarrassed, less uncertain about the future. He said he must have lain there for 2 hours, wanting. And then, at some point, he could not quite identify. The wanting itself became exhausting. Not the failure, the wanting it to be something else. And in that exhaustion, something gave way. Not resolve, not acceptance, in the effortful sense. Just the recognition that the failure had happened and he was here, and the wanting was optional. He slept within 20 minutes. This is what Marcus Aurelius was training, not indifference. The Stoics were not indifferent. They were passionate. They felt things. They grieved. But beneath the feeling, something remained that did not need the feeling to be different before it could rest. A kind of desire that had learned to rest in what was already there. There is something that happens when a person stops trying to quiet their mind and starts allowing it instead. That shift has a name. We will reach it. But the foundation for it is here, in this chapter, in the recognition that the wanting is its own exhaustion. Let your body feel the surface beneath it, the pressure points, the warmth. This is what is here. Not a problem to be solved, just what is. Let it be enough for this moment. Let your breath be enough. Let the darkness be enough. It already is. Chapter 7. Overthinking as inner noise. Marcus Aurelius was not a simple man. He was not someone who found stillness easy. The Meditations are not the writings of a man who had arrived at peace. They are the writings of a man fighting for it every day against a mind that was naturally restless, naturally analytical, naturally prone to running further and faster than was needed. He was, in the modern sense, an overthinker. He knew it. In Book 3, he wrote a kind of instruction to himself. Confine yourself to the present, not as a platitude, as a command to a mind that kept leaving the present. That kept ranging backward into what had happened and forward into what might happen, and in so doing, missing what was actually here. Overthinking is not intelligence. This is perhaps the most important clarification. People often mistake their tendency to think in circles as a sign of depth. It is not. A mind moving in circles is not moving toward anything. It is motion that looks like progress, but arrives nowhere. Marcus understood this. He wrote in Book 6 that the mind which repeats the same analysis of the same problem is not thinking, it is afraid. The analysis is a way of feeling like something is being done when nothing is being done, and nothing can be done in this moment. The psychologist Ethan Kross at the University of Michigan spent years studying what he called chatter, the voice in our heads that narrates our experience, evaluates it, and then evaluates the evaluation. He found, in research published in his book Chatter in 2021, that this inner voice, when it becomes repetitive and self-focused, is one of the primary predictors of poor sleep, poor health, and reduced performance. It is not a moral failing. It is a cognitive pattern, and patterns can be changed. What Marcus discovered, and what Kross arrived at through different means centuries later, is the same. The chatter is not you. The chatter is a function, a useful one when applied to problems that require analysis, a damaging one when applied to things that cannot be solved by analysis and do not need to be. Your sleeping body cannot be analyzed into rest. The feeling beneath the thoughts cannot be thought away. The silence you are looking for tonight will not be reached by thinking about it. It will arrive when the thinking notices it has nothing more useful to do. Here is what that looks like. Not a dramatic silencing, not a sudden blank, more like the way a room settles after everyone leaves. The noise does not stop all at once. It decreases. One voice stops, then another. The silence grows from the edges, not the center. And at some point you realize the center has become quiet too, and you are not sure when that happened. Marcus described this in Book 4 as the mind returning to itself, not going somewhere new, returning. The quiet was always there. The noise was the visitor. You have been listening to Visitors tonight. Thoughts about tomorrow. Thoughts about today. Thoughts about what you should have done and what you still need to do. They arrived without invitation, as thoughts do. They do not need to be evicted. They will leave on their own when you stop serving them. Just notice, for this moment, that the thought is happening, not what the thought is about, that it is happening. There is a difference between the content of a thought and the fact of thinking. The content can go anywhere. The fact of thinking is just this: the mind moving. You are watching the movement. You are not the movement. Let your jaw soften. Let your eyes stay wherever they are. The overthinking is not a flaw. It is a strength that has not yet found its right application. Tonight, it rests. Chapter 8, The Discipline of Assent. There is a moment that happens between the impression and the response. Most people never find it. The Stoics called it the moment of assent, sankatathesis, the instant before you say yes or no to what the impression is telling you. Before you agree with the story the mind has started to construct. Before you believe the urgency the feeling is announcing. That interval is where the discipline lives. It is not a large interval. At first, it feels like it does not exist. The impression arrives, and the response follows so quickly they seem like one thing. This is the condition most people are in when they lie awake at night. Impression arrives, belief follows, feeling follows belief, behavior follows feeling, and somewhere in that chain, the idea of sleep has been entirely forgotten. Marcus trained himself to find the interval. He described the practice in Book 7 as a kind of delay, not suppression, delay. When an impression arrives, when a thought says, "This is going to be terrible," or "You should have done better," or "You are not safe," he practiced pausing before agreeing with it. Just one beat of non-agreement, not refusal, not argument. Simply, I see this thought. I am not yet agreeing with it. In that pause, a choice appears that was not there before. Epictetus described this same interval as the most important thing a human being can cultivate. He had been enslaved. He had lived in conditions where almost everything external was beyond his control. What he found in those conditions was that the interval remained his even when nothing else did. The impression of suffering arrived. The choice to suffer, to agree with the full weight of the suffering, to build a life around it, that was still his. This is not a lesson about suppressing pain. Epictetus suffered, Marcus suffered. The Stoics were not indifferent to their experience. The discipline of assent is not about becoming someone who does not feel. It is about becoming someone who feels and then chooses, rather than feels and then reacts automatically. For sleep, this matters in a specific and practical way. When you lie down at night and a thought arrives, "I won't sleep tonight," or "tomorrow will be bad," or "I haven't done enough," that thought is an impression. It has arrived. You cannot stop it from arriving. What you can practice is the interval, the one moment of not immediately saying yes. In that interval, a question becomes available. Is this thought about what is real, or about what I fear might be real? Is it calling for action, or simply for observation? Usually, at midnight, the answer is observation. The thought does not need to be solved tonight. It does not even need to be believed tonight. It simply needs to be seen. Helena, the retired school teacher who discovered what she did not know was prosos, described the interval in her own terms. She said she learned to treat the thoughts that came at night like visitors at a door. She did not have to let them in the house. She could open the door, see who was there, and say, "Not tonight. I see you. Come back tomorrow if you must, but not tonight." That is the discipline of assent. Not aggression toward the thought, not elimination. Simply the refusal to open the door all the way in the hour when rest is more important than understanding. Feel the weight of your body. Notice that it is already resting. The body does not practice the discipline of assent. It already lives it. The body does not lie awake worrying about tomorrow's exertion. It simply waits for the mind to follow. Let the mind follow. Chapter 9. What you can control. In approximately 135 AD, a young Roman named Marcus Annius Verus was assigned a philosophy tutor named Quintus Junius Rusticus. Rusticus had himself studied with disciples of Epictetus. Through him, Epictetus's ideas entered Marcus's formation. The central idea was simple enough to state in one sentence and complex enough to spend a life learning. There are things in your power and things that are not. Keep them separate. Focus entirely on what is yours. In the Enchiridion, the short handbook of Epictetan philosophy, this idea appears in the very first sentence. Some things are in our control and others not. Things in our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever are our own actions. Things not in our control are body, reputation, command, and, in one word, whatever, are not our own actions. This is not a small list of things outside your control. It is almost everything. Your health, ultimately, is not fully in your control. Your reputation is not in your control. The behavior of others is not in your control. The weather, the economy, the decisions of people in positions of power over you, none of it. Even the body, as Epictetus notes, is not entirely yours. You can care for it. You cannot guarantee it. What is yours is narrower than most people want to acknowledge. Your response to what happens, your judgment about what matters, your decision about where to direct your attention, the way you choose to interpret the impressions that arrive, these are yours. They are yours in a way that nothing external can ever fully be, because they live inside the ruling faculty, inside the inner citadel where no one can reach without your permission. Marcus found in this not poverty, but freedom. He wrote in Book 6 that the man who does not know what is his has already lost it, and the man who knows exactly what is his and guards only that and expects nothing from the rest is the man who cannot be truly taken from. Think about what you are holding right now that is not yours to hold. Not as a judgment, as a factual inventory. The opinion someone formed of you today, not yours. The outcome of something you have already set in motion and cannot alter, not yours. The behavior of someone you love who is making choices you would not make, not yours. The future in general, not yours. These things feel like yours because you care about them. Caring is appropriate. Caring does not mean controlling. You can love something you cannot control. You can work hard toward an outcome you cannot guarantee. You can stay present with someone whose choices you cannot determine. But holding them as if they were yours, as if the caring were the same as the owning, that is where the weight comes from. The weight you can feel in your chest at midnight. The weight that follows you into sleep and meets you when you wake. Richard, the retired engineer, spent decades confusing caring with controlling. When the project was at risk, he worked longer hours because it felt like helplessness not to. When his adult children made choices he disagreed with, he reviewed and re-reviewed his parenting, looking for where he had failed. When his health required a procedure, he researched every possible complication. In each case, the extra effort felt like responsibility. He did not realize until he was past 60 that it was also, quietly, a form of not being able to bear what was outside his control. The moment he understood the dichotomy, truly understood it, not just heard it, he described it as a kind of relief he had not known he was waiting for. Not everything requires your management. Not everything is yours. Let your breath move without your direction. It is doing so already. Notice that your body is handling its own work, the heart, the lungs, the steady rhythm of repair that happens in the dark. You did not arrange for any of that. You do not need to. And there is more not yours than yours. That is not a problem. That is the condition of being alive. And within that condition, what is yours is enough. Chapter 10, What Must Be Released. There is a companion question to the one about control. Not just, what can I control, but what am I still holding that I have already been told by circumstance to put down? Marcus returned to this question throughout the meditations, not as an abstract philosophical exercise, as a practical daily reckoning. He understood that the mind collects. It gathers grievances and plans and old arguments and abandoned hopes and keeps them, sometimes for years, like a room that was never cleaned. The cleaning is release, and release is not forgetting. This is the confusion. When people resist releasing something, a wound, a resentment, an outcome that did not arrive the way they expected, they often say, "I'm not ready to forgive." Or, "I don't want to act like it didn't matter," as if releasing the grip means pretending the thing was not real or did not cause real pain. Marcus was precise about this. He understood the difference between the event and the carrying of the event. The event happened. The carrying is a choice, even when it does not feel like one. In Book 5, he wrote about the man who finishes each day having returned all things to their proper place, not storing them overnight, not dragging them into the next morning. This is not a man without feeling. It is a man who has learned that sleep requires a kind of death, a brief, voluntary release of the day's accounts. The Stoics had a practice for this, an evening review. Seneca described it in his letters to Lucilius, written in approximately 65 AD, near the end of his life. Each night, before sleeping, he examined the day, not to judge it, to release it. What happened, what he did, what he would do differently, and then set it down. Tomorrow, it can be picked up if it must be. But tonight, it does not come to bed. What would you put down tonight if you knew you could pick it up again tomorrow? Not permanently, not forever, just for these hours of darkness, just for the time between now and whenever the next day begins. The worry about money that cannot be resolved tonight. The relationship question that has no answer yet. The grief that is not finished but also cannot be finished faster than it finishes. The ambition that is still real but does not need to be tended right now. None of these require your attention for the next several hours. The world will hold them for you. They will be where you left them when morning comes. What the mind resists releasing is often not the thing itself, but the feeling that releasing the thing is abandonment, that if you stop thinking about it, you are failing it. That vigilance is a form of love. It is not. Vigilance at midnight over things that cannot be changed by midnight vigilance is not love. It is habit. And habits, unlike love, can be examined and changed. Thomas, the accountant who ran his mental accounts at 2 a.m, eventually found his way to a version of Seneca's evening practice. Before bed, he wrote 3 sentences in a notebook. What needed attention today? What he handled? What can wait until tomorrow? The writing was not elaborate. 3 sentences. Then he closed the notebook. He told his doctor that the closing of the notebook was the important part, the physical act, the sound of it, as if the mind needed a gesture it could recognize as, the accounting is done, you can stop now. You may not have a notebook, but you have this moment, and this breath, and this darkness, which is itself a kind of closing. The day is done. Its events are behind you. Whatever comes tomorrow is tomorrow's work. Release, for now, what is not tonight's. Feel your hands. Are they holding anything? They can soften. Let them soften. Let the space between your fingers be loose and open. This is what it feels like to put something down. Chapter 11. Silence before reaction. 170 AD. The Danube frontier. A military tent. Marcus Aurelius, 50 years old, emperor for 9 years, is in the field for the 5th or 6th time. The Marcomannic Wars have dragged on for years. Men have died under his command in numbers he cannot fully absorb. The plague, the Antonine Plague, which killed as many as 5 million people across the empire, has already passed through the legions. His adoptive brother and co-emperor Lucius Verus died in 169 AD, almost certainly from the disease. He is exhausted. He is grieving. He is surrounded by decisions that cannot wait. He picks up his journal. He writes, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." He does not write this because he feels it. He writes it to return to it. To practice the interval, the pause before reaction. When everything in his body wants to react with despair or anger, or the numb efficiency of pure administration. Silence before reaction is not passive. It is one of the most active practices the Stoics taught. Marcus described it in Book 11 with particular care. He knew he was capable of anger. He knew the anger, when it came, was compelling. It felt like justice, like appropriate response to real difficulty. He also knew that anger almost never produced what it promised. How much more grievous, he wrote, are the consequences of anger than the causes of it. That line was not observation. It was hard-won experience. The silence before reaction is the moment in which you can remember this. Before the words arrive, before the action commits itself. In that moment, a question is available. What is actually needed here? Not what feels needed, not what the anger or the fear or the exhaustion is recommending. What is actually needed? This is not slowness. A surgeon does not hesitate before incisions in a way that costs lives. The military commander does not pause in ways that surrender advantage. The silence before reaction is not inaction. It is the difference between responding and reacting, between choosing and being driven. At midnight, the difference matters in a specific and personal way. Something happens, a thought, a sound, a sensation, and the mind moves immediately to interpret, to judge, to plan. The reaction has already started. Most people do not catch it. The interpretation feels like observation. The judgment feels like fact. The plan feels like necessity. The silence before reaction is the practice of catching the movement before it finishes. Not to stop it, to see it. There is something that sounds like a paradox, but is not. To insert a moment of silence before reacting to the noise is itself a way of becoming quieter, not by willing the noise to stop, by building, one practiced pause at a time, a habit of not immediately following wherever the noise leads. Marcus practiced this in the morning, so it would be available to him during the day. He prepared for difficulty before difficulty arrived. The Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. Not pessimism, readiness, knowing that hard things will come and having the pause already built into the response. You do not need to build it tonight. It is already here. Right now, if a thought arrives, even a loud one, even one with some urgency behind it, you have the space of a breath before you follow it. That breath is the silence. That breath is the practice. Not an elaborate technique, just the one breath in which you remember that you have a choice. Notice your breath. Not to change it, to let it be the silence between whatever came before and whatever comes next. That is enough. That has always been enough. Chapter 12, The Soul Without Complaint. Marcus Aurelius complained constantly. This is not a contradiction. The meditations are full of frustration, full of the record of a man who found people irritating, found his responsibilities heavy, found the empire demanding and difficult and often ungrateful. He did not pretend otherwise. He was honest in his private writing about the full weight of what he carried. And then, this is the discipline. He returned to the question of what was his to do. Not complaining, for Marcus, did not mean not feeling. It meant not organizing his life around the complaint, not making the difficulty the central fact, not using the grievance as the lens through which everything else was filtered. There is a difference between the experience of frustration and the identity of someone who is frustrated. Marcus felt the first. He worked daily, not to become the second. Seneca, in his letters, described a similar discipline. He wrote, that the wise man does not rage at misfortune, not because he is above it, but because he has agreed with reality. He has said, yes, this is what existence includes: difficulty, loss, people who disappoint, plans that fail, bodies that age, time that does not return. These are not aberrations in an otherwise orderly system. They are the system. To complain at length about what the system is, to spend the midnight hours rehearsing the unfairness, the inadequacy, the gap between what is and what should be, is to spend time in a room with no door. The complaint can go on indefinitely. It arrives nowhere. The soul without complaint is not the soul without feeling. It is the soul that has decided to put its energy somewhere the energy can land. Adam, who found release from his professional failure by simply allowing it to have happened, described something he called the second failure. The first failure was the event. The second was the weeks he spent afterward, telling himself and anyone who would listen how unfair it was, how it should have gone differently, how the system was flawed, the process was corrupt, the outcome was unjust. All of that may have been true. None of it was useful. The second failure, he said, cost him more than the first. Because the first was a thing that happened to him. The second was something he was doing to himself. Marcus wrote in Book 9 about the man who blames others for his distress, not to condemn him, with understanding. Marcus knew the impulse, but he also knew that as long as the source of distress is located outside yourself, in another person's behavior, in circumstances, in the unkindness of events, then peace is also located outside yourself. It depends on something changing that may not change. The soul without complaint has moved the source inward, not to blame itself, to reclaim what is within its jurisdiction. The night cannot be argued with. The thoughts cannot be reasoned away. The body's need for rest cannot be managed by your grievances against the day that preceded it. The day was what it was. You were in it. You did what you could. Some of it went well, some did not. The record is already complete. Feel the place in your body where you are holding the complaint, not asking you to release it, just to notice it, where it lives, what it feels like, a tightness somewhere, a small heat, a held breath. Now let your breath move through that place, not to fix it, just to acknowledge it. The complaint is real. It does not need to be your companion for the rest of the night. Chapter 13, Mental Clarity in Darkness. There is a particular quality of thought that becomes available only at night. Not better thought, not more productive thought. Something different in texture, less performative, less managed, less shaped by the need to appear competent or certain or decisive. The darkness removes the audience, and without an audience, the mind can sometimes find what it actually thinks. Marcus Aurelius knew this. He wrote in the darkness, or by lamplight, which is close to the same. The meditations are night thoughts, private thoughts, the kind that do not have to prove anything. He wrote about impermanence with a directness he could not have sustained in a public speech. He wrote about his own failures and weaknesses without the defensive framing that power requires. He allowed himself to be uncertain, to be lost, to be a man in need of guidance rather than a man dispensing it. This is one of the undervalued gifts of insomnia, if you can find it. Not the sleeplessness itself, that is exhausting and unhealthy and should not be romanticized, but the particular quality of attention available in the dark when the ordinary defenses of daylight are slightly lowered. That is something. The Stoics called it the examined life, after Socrates, who had declared in approximately 399 BC that the unexamined life is not worth living. Marcus took this seriously not as a philosophical position, but as a daily instruction. Each evening he examined. He looked at what the day had been. He looked at where his attention had gone. He looked at whether his actions had aligned with his values or wandered from them, not to punish himself, to see clearly. Mental clarity in darkness is not about solving problems. It is closer to what the psychologist Bessel van der Kolk describes in The Body Keeps the Score, the condition that allows the nervous system to process what it has experienced rather than suppress it. When the body is safe, when there is no immediate demand, when the darkness signals the end of the day's performance, the mind can do something other than perform. It can remember. It can process. It can, very gently, let things become simpler than they seemed when the stakes felt high. Have you ever noticed that the problem that seemed enormous at 11 at night often looks different at 7 in the morning? Not because the problem changed, because you, temporarily released from the noise, could see it without all the amplification that anxiety provides. That seeing is available right now. Not necessarily tonight. Some nights the mind is too busy for it, but it is always available in principle. The capacity to see clearly is not a function of circumstances. It is a function of attention. Marcus wrote in Book 4 that the man who has ruled his own mind rules more than the man who rules empires. This was not modesty. He ruled an empire, and he knew it was harder to rule his own mind. It was precision. The empire was external. It could be lost. The clarity of his own attention, that was internal. That remained when everything else was in chaos. You do not need to be in chaos to appreciate this. Right now, in the darkness, your mind is capable of a quality of seeing it cannot always access in the noise of daylight. Not sharper, exactly, quieter, less interested in being right, more interested in what is true. Let it look for a moment. Not at anything in particular. Just let it rest its attention gently on whatever is here. The breath, the weight of the body, the temperature of the air. Something that seemed important today may feel less so now. That is not diminishment, that is clarity. The philosopher Henri Bergson, at the Collège de France in the early 20th century, described what he called duration, the actual lived experience of time as distinct from clock time. Clock time moves in equal units. Duration moves according to the quality of attention. A deeply absorbed hour feels like minutes. A bored minute can feel like an hour. And a night spent awake, cycling through anxious thoughts, can feel endless in a way that has nothing to do with the number of hours that passed. What Bergson observed was that the quality of consciousness changes how we inhabit time. The mental clarity available in darkness is, in part, a function of changed duration. The night moves differently from the day. Less urgency in it. Less of the compressed, scheduled quality that daylight imposes. In the night's duration, a thought has more room to be what it actually is, rather than what it needs to be in order to fit into the available time. Marcus understood this. He wrote at night, presumably, because the night gave thoughts their proper shape. Not the shape required by the day, efficient, purposeful, directed toward outcome, the shape they naturally took when left to themselves. If there is something that has been following you today, some question, some feeling, some unnamed sense of something not quite right, you may find that in this darkness it becomes more legible. Not more solvable, more legible. The outlines become clearer. The actual nature of the thing reveals itself, separate from the urgency that surrounded it in the day. You do not have to do anything with that clarity tonight. You can simply see what is here. File it gently for when the day returns and action becomes possible again. Something that seemed important today may feel less so now. That is not diminishment. That is clarity. Chapter 14, The Practice of Withdrawing. Marcus Aurelius used the word anakaresis, that in Greek meant a retreat, a withdrawal from the field of battle back to a place of regrouping. He applied it to the mind. In Book 4 of the Meditations, he wrote one of the most important passages in the entire text. He noted that people seek retreats in the country, by the sea, in the mountains. And he acknowledged that this impulse makes sense. But then he offered something different. Men seek retreats for themselves, houses in the country, seashores and mountains. And thou too art wont to desire such things very much. But this is altogether a mark of the most common sort of men, for it is in thy power whenever thou shalt choose to retire into thyself. For nowhere either with more quiet or more freedom from trouble does a man retire than into his own soul. The country house is external. The soul is internal. You can go there any time. This is not mysticism. Marcus was the least mystical of philosophers in many respects. He was a practical man, a military man, a governor. When he speaks of retiring into the soul, he means something specific. Withdrawing attention from the external noise and redirecting it to the inner citadel, the place where judgment lives. The place where the ruling faculty sits in relative quiet. It is a practice, not a state. You do not arrive at the inner retreat and stay there permanently. You visit, you return, you visit again. The psychologist and philosopher William James writing at Harvard in the 1890s, described something adjacent to this in his work on attention. He said that the faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will, and that an education which should improve this faculty would be the education par excellence. Marcus, 17 centuries earlier, had designed exactly that education for himself. The practice of withdrawing is not complicated. It does not require silence in the room. It does not require a special posture or a cleared mind. It requires only the recognition that you have an inside as well as an outside. That within the noise, within the traffic of impressions and reactions and stories and fears, there is a place from which all of it can be observed without being consumed by it. You have visited it. Everyone has visited it, usually without knowing the visit had a name. The moment in a difficult situation when something inside you stepped back and became the watcher rather than the participant. The moment after a conflict when, exhausted, you found a strange stillness. The moment in grief when the grief was very present, but also beneath it something that was not grief. Something that simply continued to exist without requiring the grief to stop. That underneath thing, that is where the withdrawal leads. Tonight, the withdrawal is available to you without effort. You are already lying down. The world's demands have been suspended. Your body is doing its resting work. The only thing between you and the inner retreat is the habit of looking outward when there is nothing outside worth looking at. Look inward, not for anything in particular, not for answers or clarity or resolution, just to notice that there is an inside, that it is here, that it has been here all along. The philosopher and contemplative Thomas Merton at the Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky described his decades of monastic life not as a turning away from the world, but as a turning toward what the world's noise prevented him from hearing. He wrote in The Sign of Jonas, his 1953 journal, about the quality of silence in the early morning hours of the monastery, the kind of silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something that sound normally covers over. He was describing, from within the Christian monastic tradition, exactly what Marcus Aurelius was describing from within the Stoic one, the interior that is accessible only when the exterior has been given permission to be less demanding. Adam, who found his way into this interior through the involuntary withdrawal of a professional crisis, described it this way years later. He said the crisis had done for him what he could not have done for himself voluntarily. It had removed, overnight, the entire apparatus of external identity. The title, the projects, the meetings, the status, and left him standing in front of something he had not known was there. He said, "I was terrified for about 6 months. And then I realized I was terrified of myself. And then I realized there was nothing to be terrified of. The interior is not frightening. It is only unfamiliar, like a room in a house you have owned for years but never entered. Strange at first, then recognizable." Then, over time, the most familiar room of all, just to notice that there is an inside, that it is here, that it has been here, all along. The room does not answer. Chapter 15. Solitude without loneliness. Marcus Aurelius spent enormous amounts of time alone, and yet he was rarely, if ever, alone. He traveled with armies, he governed with advisors, he ate with senators, and slept in tents surrounded by guards. Physical solitude was almost impossible for him. What he cultivated instead was something interior, a capacity to be alone within himself even while surrounded by others. This is a distinction that becomes important at night. Loneliness is not the condition of being alone. Loneliness is the condition of being with yourself and finding yourself inadequate company. The person who cannot bear their own presence, who reaches for noise, for screens, for the nearest distraction the moment silence descends, is lonely in a way that has nothing to do with whether other people are present. And the person who has learned to inhabit their own interior with something like comfort, who can be in the dark without immediately needing it to be something other than dark, that person can be in a crowd and still be, in some essential sense, at rest. Marcus wrote about this as the natural condition of the inner citadel. The man who lives in his own ruling faculty does not require external company to feel complete. Not because he is above human connection. Marcus loved his family, grieved his losses, depended on his friends. But because connection for him was additive, not necessary for survival, this is a significant difference. The Stoic philosopher Cato the Younger, who died in 46 BC after refusing to submit to Caesar, was described by Plutarch as someone who could be in a room full of noise and find the silence in himself. Cato was not indifferent to the noise. He heard it. He simply did not depend on it. He had cultivated such an interior life that the exterior was, in some sense, secondary. Adam, years after his professional crisis, described how the solitude of his recovery period, unwanted at first, almost unbearable in the early months, gradually became something he recognized. Not preferred, not sought, recognized. As if the silence were a face he had forgotten he knew. He said, "I think I spent 40 years running from myself, and I didn't realize that what I was running from was actually the most interesting thing I'd ever encounter." Not everyone arrives at this through suffering. Some people find it in a practice, some in a long relationship, some in the simple accumulated experience of enough nights lying quietly in the dark. The thing they find when they stop running is not emptiness. Loneliness feels like emptiness. Solitude, true solitude, feels like the opposite, like a fullness that does not depend on being filled by something external. Marcus wrote in Book 3 that a man who has not considered who he is cannot be harmed by the opinions of others, because those opinions cannot find him where he actually lives. This is not arrogance. It is the natural result of knowing your own interior well enough that the exterior, for all its noise, cannot easily dislodge you. Right now you are alone, in the best sense. Whatever is happening in the world outside this room, you are here, in the dark. in the particular quiet of your own body. This is not loneliness. This is the condition Marcus spent his life cultivating. You can rest here. This inside is yours. No one can reach it tonight unless you carry them in. Let your breath fill the space. Let the silence be company. It is enough. It always has been. Chapter 16, The Quiet Judge Within. There is a voice in you that is not the critic. Not the one that runs the accounts at 2 a.m, not the one that rehearses old arguments or anticipates future ones. Not the one that measures and compares and finds the measurement always slightly short. Behind that voice is another one, quieter, less interested in being heard. Marcus Aurelius called it daemon, a word the ancient Greeks used for the inner spirit or guiding principle, not a supernatural entity, more like the deepest expression of who you are, when all the noise has been stripped away. The voice of your actual values rather than your anxious concerns. He wrote about it in Book 3 with unusual care. Reverence the daimon that is in thee, not as a poetic gesture, as an instruction. This part of you, the part that knows without calculation what kind of person you want to be, is worth listening to more than the anxiety, more than the social pressure, more than the evaluation that runs all night without arriving anywhere. The Stoics believed this inner voice was connected to the logos, the rational principle underlying all of existence. Not a religious claim, exactly, though it has religious echoes. More like the recognition that within each human being, beneath all the noise, there is something that is oriented toward truth and goodness and right action. Something that knows the difference between what the anxiety is recommending and what is actually needed. Modern psychology has arrived at something similar through very different means. The psychologist Carl Rogers, writing in the mid-20th century about client-centered therapy, described what he called the organismic valuing process, a deep, precognitive sense that a person has about what is good and bad for them, not always accessible, not always heard, but present. Abraham Maslow at Brandeis University in the 1960s described peak experiences, moments in which a person glimpses with unusual clarity what they actually value, separate from what they have been conditioned to value. These moments, he found, tend to occur in conditions of quiet and safety. They do not often occur in the noise. The quiet judge within is not infallible. It is not omniscient. It does not have all the answers. But it is closer to your actual values than the anxious voice that runs the midnight review. And it speaks in a different register, less urgent, more steady, less interested in winning an argument than in pointing at what matters. You may have heard it, most people have heard it at least once, in a moment of unusual quiet after a loss during a long and lonely walk. The voice that did not tell you what you wanted to hear, but told you something true. It is there now, beneath the noise of the day, beneath the habit of reviewing and rehearsing and worrying. The philosopher and teacher Simone Weil, writing in France in the 1940s, described what she called attention as the rarest and purest form of generosity. She was talking about the attention we give to others, but the idea extends inward. To pay genuine attention to the quiet voice within, not to the performance of the self, not to the self-criticism or the self-promotion, but to the actual interior signal, that is also a kind of generosity, to the self that has been overridden all day. James Hollis, a Jungian analyst and author who worked through the late 20th and early 21st centuries, wrote in his book Finding Meaning in the Second Half of Life that the central task of a mature life is not achievement, but the recovery of contact with the self, not the social self, the professional self, the self that knows how to behave in every room it enters, the self that is prior to all of that, older, less interested in being impressive. This is the self that the quiet judge represents. The voice that does not evaluate whether you were good enough today. It does not run the social accounting. It knows something simpler. You are here. You are breathing. This is enough to merit rest. You may have spent the day in the service of many things, many people, many obligations that were real and deserving of your attention. None of that is diminished by the recognition that underneath the serving there is a self that also deserves attention, that also needs to be heard. It is not saying much tonight, it rarely does, but it is there in the steadiness of your breath, in the way your body knows to rest even when your mind has not yet caught up. It is there in the part of you that chose to lie down, to try for sleep, to give the night over to rest. That choosing was not the anxious voice. The anxious voice does not rest. The quiet judge said, "Enough, this day is done. Rest now." Listen to that voice tonight. It knows something the rest of you is still trying to figure out. Chapter 17, Stress and the Stoic Pause. Stress is information. This was something the Stoics understood before the word stress existed. When a difficulty arrives, a demand, a threat, an uncertainty, the body responds before the mind does. Shoulders tighten. Breath shallows. The jaw closes. Attention narrows to the source of the difficulty and cuts off everything peripheral. This is the body doing exactly what it evolved to do. It is preparing for response. The problem is that most modern stress does not require the kind of response the body is preparing for. The difficult email, the financial worry, the relationship tension, the persistent background sense that something is not quite right. None of these require the same response as the threats our ancestors faced. But the body does not distinguish. The physiological preparation is essentially the same. Heart rate up, breathing shallow, muscles contracted, mind narrowed. And then, because there is no physical response available, no running or fighting that would discharge the preparation, the body stays in that state. Tightened, narrowed, braced for something that is not coming in a form the body can resolve. Marcus understood the physiology in intuitive terms. 2,000 years before neuroscience could name it. He wrote in Book 8 about the man who takes from every external event exactly what was given and no more, who does not add to what happened his own elaborations, his fears about what it means, his extrapolations about what it predicts. That discipline, taking from events exactly what they give and nothing more, is the physiological work of the Stoic pause. The pause is this: between the event and the response, a moment of conscious recognition. The body has registered a difficulty. The body is preparing a response. Before the response unfolds automatically, a brief interval of awareness, not a long interval, a breath. In that breath, a question. What is actually happening here, and what is my mind adding to it? The psychologist Hans Selye, who coined the term stress in its modern medical sense in the 1950s at McGill University, distinguished between the stressor, the thing in the environment, and the stress response, what the body and mind do with it. The stressor is often not in our control. The stress response, with practice, becomes more controllable. The Stoic pause is one of the most ancient and most empirically supported methods for modifying the stress response. Modern interventions like cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and acceptance and commitment therapy all contain versions of it. Marcus practiced it as a daily discipline, not only in the philosophical sense, but in the physical sense. He was known to pause before speaking in difficult situations. He practiced slowing the response, not from cowardice or calculation, but from the recognition that the first response is almost always not the best one. Tonight, the stress that brought you to this darkened room, the tightness in the shoulders, the loop in the mind, the shallow breath, is the body doing its ancient work. It is trying to help. It is mistaken about what the situation requires, but it is trying to help. You can honor that. You can say internally, I see what you are doing. I know why you are doing it. It is not needed right now. The night does not require a response. The night requires rest. Feel your shoulders. Let them drop, even a fraction. Notice your breath. It is probably shallower than it needs to be. Let it deepen a little without forcing. The body wants to help. Give it different instructions for tonight. Instructions it already knows. Rest. All of you. Rest. Chapter 18. When the world demands you. Marcus Aurelius was emperor for almost 20 years. In that time, he was demanded by more people than any single human being should have to face. Not just politically or militarily, though those demands were enormous. He was demanded personally, constantly. His advice sought, his judgment required, his presence expected. People wanted him to be decisive when he felt uncertain, steady when he was grieving, energized when he was exhausted. The world required him to be a different person than he was, and required it continuously. He did not comply fully, but he tried to serve. Most people who spend a life in service to others, as parents, as professionals, as partners, as the dependable ones in whatever circle they inhabit, know a version of this. The world has needs, and you have the capacity to meet some of them. And over time, the meeting of needs becomes the primary structure of your days, and the question of what you need gets deferred and deferred and deferred again, until night, when there are no more demands, and the quiet is strange. Helena, the retired school teacher, described the first months after retirement as disorienting in a way she had not anticipated. For 38 years, her mornings had been organized by external demand: the alarm, the classroom, the lesson plan, the students. When the demand stopped, she found that the quiet it left behind was not restful. It was bewildering. She had organized her sense of self around her availability to others. Without the demand, the self felt unclear. This is one of the subtler things Marcus was navigating when he wrote about the Inner Citadel. He was not writing about escaping the demands of the world. He had a duty. He took it seriously. He was writing about maintaining, beneath all those demands, a self that was not entirely constituted by its response to them. A self that had its own axis, its own north. The Stoic philosopher Hierocles, writing in approximately 100 AD, described a series of concentric circles around the self. From the body, to the family, to the community, to the city, to the world. The Stoic work was to extend care outward through all these circles without losing the center, without dissolving the self into the outermost ring. When the world demands you, it is taking from you in the direction of the outer circles. This is not always wrong. To give to others is meaningful. But giving without a center to give from is not generosity. It is depletion. The question Marcus kept returning to was not, how do I do less? He could not do less. He was emperor. The question was, how do I do what I do without losing the thing that makes the doing worth anything? The answer he arrived at was the daily practice of return to the inner citadel. Each morning, before the demands began, he returned to his own center, and then he went out and gave what was needed. And when night came, he returned again. Tonight, the demands have stopped. Whatever you gave today to the work, the people, the obligations, the performance of your competence and your care, that giving is done. You do not have to be available right now. The world will make its requests tomorrow. For these hours, you are not required. You are not on call. You are not accountable. You are simply a body in a dark room that needs to rest. Let yourself be only that. It is enough. For tonight, it is all that is asked. Chapter 19, The Peace of Small Things. There is a passage in the Meditations that surprises people when they find it. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, writing about bread. He notes that when bread bakes, it cracks at the surface, and that the cracks, though unintended, have their own beauty. The baker did not design them. Nature produced them in the course of the bread becoming what it is. And Marcus found in those cracks something worth noticing, something that, if the eyes and attention are calibrated correctly, is genuinely beautiful. He was describing a practice, not aesthetics. The practice of finding, in small and unremarkable things, the evidence that the world is working, is coherently, continuously, unremarkably working, and that your presence in it is not a problem to be solved, but a fact to be inhabited. The peace of small things is a Stoic practice, though Stoicism is not generally known for it. Marcus walked through Rome and noticed things: a shaft of light between buildings, the particular quality of the morning air in autumn, the expression on a child's face before the child noticed being watched. He was not a sentimentalist. He was a man who had decided that the alternative to noticing was to exist entirely in the traffic of concerns and demands, which was its own kind of sleep. The sleep of a man who is present nowhere because he is thinking about everywhere. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen monk and teacher who was exiled from his country in 1966 and spent the following decades teaching engaged Buddhism in the West, wrote extensively about what he called the miracle of mindfulness, not as a Buddhist proposition, as a simple observation about attention. He wrote in his 1975 book, The Miracle of Mindfulness, that the present moment is the only moment available to us, and that to be in it, truly in it, is to find it sufficient. He was also describing the peace of small things, not the absence of difficulty, not the resolution of all outstanding concerns. The peace that comes from the recognition that right now, in this moment, apart from the story the mind is telling about what was and what will be, right now, in this moment, something is simply here. Your body, the temperature of the room, the quality of the dark, the sound, if there is a sound, perhaps rain or silence, or the distant evidence of the world continuing without requiring your management. Richard, years after his retirement, found the peace of small things in an unexpected place. He had been a man of large projects, bridges and buildings and systems. After retirement, he took up gardening, not seriously, not as a project, just a small garden at the back of the house. And he found, to his genuine surprise, that the things that most interested him were the smallest ones. The way a particular flower opened between 7 and 8 in the morning. The color of the soil after rain. A spider building something in the corner of the fence. He said, "I spent my whole career thinking big, and then I discovered that the small things had been there the whole time, and I had been too busy to see them." The Japanese aesthetic tradition has a word for this: mono no aware, the pathos of things, the bittersweet awareness of the transience of small and beautiful things. A falling cherry blossom, the quality of light in late afternoon, the particular texture of an old wooden floor. These are not consolations for the absence of large meaning. They are the medium in which large meaning, when it arrives, arrives. Kenji Watanabe, a physician who spent 40 years practicing medicine in rural Japan and wrote a short memoir at the end of his practice, described what he considered the greatest gift of his profession. Not the ability to diagnose or to cure, but the permission it gave him to be present at the small moments that other people were too busy or too frightened to inhabit. The moment a patient's breathing eased. The moment a family member's face relaxed from fear into something approaching acceptance. These were not dramatic moments, they were small ones. And they were, he wrote, the whole of medicine. Marcus would have understood this completely. His daily practice, the morning preparation, the evening review, the disciplined examination of impressions throughout the day, was not aimed at enlightenment, it was aimed at presence. At the capacity to be in the moment he was in, rather than the moment he was managing or anticipating or reviewing. The small things were the training ground. If he could notice the cracks in the bread, the quality of early light in Rome, the particular gesture of a man he was speaking with, if he could hold these details in his attention without immediately instrumentalizing them, without making them useful or categorizing them or moving past them toward the next thing, then he was practicing the same quality of attention that would serve him when things became difficult. Presence is not a state you summon for the large occasions. It is a practice developed in the small ones. Right now, in this dark room, there are small things. The temperature of the air, the weight of the blanket, the faint pressure of the pillow. These are not remarkable. They are not worth analyzing. They are simply here, asking nothing, requiring nothing, sufficient in their small particularity. Let your attention rest on one of them, just one. The most immediate, the most ordinary, the least dramatic thing in your awareness right now. There it is. Marcus Aurelius, in the middle of an empire, forced himself back to the small things, not because the empire did not matter, but because the small things were what kept the empire from consuming him. Right now, in this room, there are small things. The softness of what you are lying on, the slight warmth of the air near your body, the rhythm of breath. These are not compensations for the large things that are unresolved. They are what is here. They are enough to rest in, if you allow them to be. Let your attention rest on one small thing, just one, not the largest thought, the smallest sensation, the most immediate, unremarkable thing in your awareness right now. That is where the peace is, not somewhere else. Here, Chapter 20, Death as a Teacher. Marcus Aurelius wrote about death more than any other single subject in the Meditations. This is not morbidity. It is the opposite of morbidity. It is the practice the Stoics called memento mori, the remembering of mortality, not as a way of making life darker, but as the most reliable method they knew of making it more vivid. He wrote in Book 2, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." This is a sentence that requires sitting with, not in the dark melodrama that the word death sometimes produces, in the specific clarity it offers. Right now, tonight, if you could leave life right now, if this were the last night, what would remain important? What would lose its urgency? What would reveal itself as the thing that actually mattered? Most of what keeps people awake fails this test. The unresolved professional grievance, the social embarrassment, the ambitious plan that is proceeding slower than expected, the conversation that went wrong. Held against the membrane of mortality, most of these deflate, not because they are unimportant, because they are not the most important. And in the middle of the night, when nothing can be acted on anyway, they have borrowed the status of the most important and are costing sleep they have not earned. Fyodor Dostoevsky stood before a firing squad in St. Petersburg in December 1849. He was 28 years old. He had been convicted of revolutionary conspiracy. He stood in the snow, surrounded by the other condemned men, and watched the rifles raised. The rifles held. A messenger arrived with a commuted sentence. Dostoevsky would be sent to Siberia instead. He would survive. He would write Crime and Punishment, The Brothers Karamazov, The Idiot. He would become one of the greatest writers in the history of the language. But in that moment, before the messenger arrived, in the interval between the raised rifles and the knowledge of reprieve, he understood something that he spent the rest of his life trying to write. That every moment is a gift, not a metaphor, a literal gift, something given to you that you did not earn and cannot take for granted. He wrote later that in those seconds he understood what the rest of us spend lifetimes trying to learn. That the smallest things, the face of a friend, the color of the sky, the warmth of a body in a room, are themselves the point. That the meaning is not ahead of the moment. It is in the moment, distributed evenly through everything that is simply here. Marcus Aurelius came to the same knowledge not through crisis, but through discipline. He made himself remember mortality daily so he would not need a near-death experience to find it. He would not waste the morning on what was not worth the morning. He would not spend the evening on what was not worth the evening and the night. He would not spend the night fighting the night. You are alive right now. This is the gift. Not a comfortable gift necessarily, not a simple one, but the alternative which will come for all of us in its own time is nothing. No thought, no night, no breath. You are breathing. You are here. The night is dark and quiet, and yours. That is something. That is everything the moment has to offer, and it is enough. Let the breath remind you that you are here, that you are still here, that for right now, the gift has not been withdrawn. Chapter 21, The End of Restlessness. There is a word Marcus Aurelius used in Book 4 that translators struggle with. The Greek is ataraxia, usually rendered as tranquility or equanimity or inner peace. But none of those quite catch it. Ataraxia means, most literally, the absence of disturbance, not the presence of joy, not the presence of certainty, simply undisturbedness, the condition in which the mind is not being driven by forces outside itself. This is a modest description of something profound. Most people, when they imagine peace, imagine it as a kind of fullness, a warm feeling, a contentment. And sometimes it is those things. But Marcus was describing something quieter, the absence of a disturbance, the stopping of a driving force that was not yours to begin with. Restlessness has a structure. It is not random. It is organized around something the mind wants and is not getting. Sometimes the wanting is obvious. A person who wants to sleep cannot sleep, and the wanting is itself the disturbance. Sometimes the wanting is hidden. A person lies awake without knowing what they want, only knowing that something feels unresolved. The Stoics were interested in the hidden kind because that one is harder to name and therefore harder to release. Marcus wrote about restlessness as the natural condition of the unexamined life. The mind that has never been trained to look at its own workings, that has only ever been directed outward toward achievement and acquisition, and the management of the external world, that mind, when the external world quiets, does not know what to do with itself. It has no interior practice to fall back on. So it generates noise. It finds things to worry about. It runs the accounts. It cannot stop because stopping is what it never learned to do. The examined life that Socrates described and Marcus practiced is, among other things, the cultivation of an interior, a home inside yourself that you can return to, a practice of knowing what you actually think and want and value, separate from what you have been told to think and want and value. Without that interior, the restlessness has nowhere to resolve. It loops. With it, the restlessness can find the place where it ends. Not a dramatic ending, more like a tide coming in and then, very quietly, going out again. The wave was real. It touched everything. And then it receded, and the shore was there, unchanged, underneath. The shore is the ataraxia, the undisturbed place, not always accessible, not something you can force, but something you can practice approaching by examining the impressions, by distinguishing what is yours from what is not, by returning again and again to the ruling faculty that watches without being swept away. You may be feeling some version of restlessness right now, the mind still moving, still ranging over the day, the future, the unresolved. That is fine. The restlessness does not need to stop completely before you can rest. The tide does not need to fully recede before the shore can be felt. Even now, beneath the movement, there is something that is not moving, that has not been disturbed by the day's events, that is not waiting for the right circumstances before it can rest. It is resting already. Your body has been doing this the whole time. The breath moves in and out without restlessness. The heart beats without reviewing its performance. The physical self already lives in ataraxia. It is only the mind that has been left outside. Invite the mind in, not by commanding it, by noticing that there is a quiet underneath the noise, and letting your attention move gently toward it, The end of restlessness is not a decision, it is a noticing. It is here. Chapter 22, Anger Dissolved by Reason. Marcus Aurelius had a temper. This is not widely known because the meditations give the impression of a man of unusual composure. But between the lines and in the historical record, the evidence of a man who struggled with anger is clear. He wrote about anger with the specificity of personal experience. He noted his own tendencies toward frustration with people who did not meet his standards. He recorded his efforts to return, after anger, to something better. He was not a man who had conquered anger. He was a man who had learned to work with it. In Book 11, he wrote one of his most careful passages on the subject. How much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it? This is empirical observation, not moral instruction. He had watched enough of anger's consequences in himself, in the people around him, in the history of the empire, to know that the damage anger produces almost always exceeds the offense that provoked it. He also wrote in Book 6 that when you feel anger rising, imagine the person who wronged you as a man sleeping. They are not your enemy in that moment. They are a person who has fears and needs and history, who made a choice that caused you harm, and who, in their private darkness, is as uncertain and frightened as everyone else. This is not a technique for becoming indifferent. It is a technique for returning to complexity. Anger simplifies. It reduces the person who angered you to a function, the thing they did, the harm they caused. The moment you can hold their full humanity, sleeping, uncertain, afraid, the anger has to share the room with something else, and sharing the room changes the temperature. Seneca, writing about anger in his essay De Ira in approximately 45 AD, described it as a temporary madness. Not poetically, he meant it practically. Under the influence of intense anger, the judgment is impaired in ways that closely resemble impaired judgment from other causes. Decisions made in anger are decisions made in a compromised state. This is not a moral claim. It is an observation about cognitive function. And yet, anger is often not unreasonable. This is the difficult part. Often, the thing that caused the anger was genuinely wrong, genuinely unfair, genuinely a failure of care or respect or honesty. The anger was appropriate. Its target was real. The Stoic position is not that the anger was wrong. It is that the anger does not need to be the response, that something more useful is available on the other side of the anger if you can wait for it. The dissolved anger, the one that has moved through its heat and come out the other side as something cooler, is often the raw material for the clearest action. The person who acts from dissolved anger acts with precision. They know what they want to address. They are not still in the heat of the simplification. They can see the full situation. Tonight, if you are carrying anger, from today, from this week, from older wounds that today's events reopened, you do not need to resolve it right now. You cannot fully resolve it right now. Resolution requires action, and action requires daylight and presence and the other person. What you can do is notice it. Give it its name. Acknowledge that it arrived because something real happened. And then, not as abandonment, not as forgiveness you are not yet ready to give, simply set it down for the night. The grievance will be there tomorrow. The clarity will be better in the morning. Let your body soften around wherever the anger lives. Not to release it permanently, just for tonight. Just for tonight, a little softening. That is enough. Now we are approaching something. Remember what we planted early, that silence, Marcus discovered, was not the absence of sound, but the presence of something else. We are getting closer to naming it. Chapter 23, Forgiveness Without Drama. Forgiveness is one of the most misrepresented ideas in common use. It has been burdened with an enormous amount of drama, the tearful reconciliation, the decisive moment, the inner transformation that arrives all at once and changes everything. This is not what forgiveness usually is, and the dramatic version may be precisely what prevents people from finding the quieter version, which is actually available. Marcus Aurelius wrote about forgiveness without calling it forgiveness. He wrote about the restoration of equanimity after harm, about the return to one's own center after being displaced by another person's actions, about the recognition that the person who harmed you is not, on balance, less worthy of basic human decency than anyone else. This is not the same as saying what they did was acceptable, or that the harm was not real, or that you are required to maintain a close relationship with someone who repeatedly injures you. Marcus was not naive. He understood betrayal. He had been betrayed by people he trusted. He understood cruelty. He had seen it exercised, and had had to decide as governor how to respond to it. What he wrote about was not the large, dramatic moments. He wrote about the small, persistent practice of not letting another person's failings become the lens through which he saw everything. The philosopher Hannah Arendt, writing in her 1958 work, The Human Condition, made a distinction that echoes Marcus. She argued that forgiveness is not about the past, about what happened, about whether it was right or wrong. It is about the future, about releasing the other person from the prison of being only what they did, and, crucially, about releasing yourself from the prison of being only what was done to you. The person who cannot forgive, not morally, but practically, remains in relationship with the event. Every time the grievance is rehearsed, the event happens again inside the person who is rehearsing it. The original harm is compounded by the repetition. This is not a judgment on people who are not ready to forgive. Some harms require time. Some require the other person's acknowledgement before any release is possible. Some are still too fresh. None of this is moral failure. But at night, in the dark, when the rehearsal begins again, and the old arguments replay, and the mind runs the case for the 1000th time, there is a question worth asking. Not, should I forgive? But, What is this rehearsal doing for me right now? If the answer is nothing, if the answer is I have been through this 1,000 times and I arrive at the same place, then the rehearsal is not serving you. It is habit masquerading as processing. What Marcus suggests in the space between the lines of the meditations is this: begin with the small forgiveness, not the enormous one, if that is not yet possible. Begin with the recognition that the person who harmed you is a person, that they sleep and doubt and suffer in their own ways, that they made choices you would not have made for reasons that probably make sense to them in some incomplete way. That does not excuse the harm. It simply makes the person three-dimensional again, rather than a figure in your private grievance story. And in making them three-dimensional, something lightens. Not everything, not the big thing, not yet, but something. Begin there. In the small forgiveness, in the return of complexity. Right now, if there is someone in your mind tonight, a person whose choices caused you harm, you do not need to resolve it. You do not need to feel warmth toward them. But for this night, for these hours, you might allow them to be a person rather than a grievance. Just a person, somewhere in the dark themselves, uncertain, probably not thinking about you at all. Let them rest in their own night, and let yourself rest in yours. Chapter 24. The body wants sleep. The body has been working all day without your attention. Your heart has beaten roughly 100,000 times since you woke this morning. Your lungs have moved approximately 20,000 times. Your liver has processed more chemistry than any laboratory could replicate. Your nervous system has handled a continuous torrent of information, sensory, emotional, environmental, social, and sorted it, mostly without your knowledge, into action and memory and background noise. And now the body is asking for something very simple, a period of reduced demand. A few hours in which the system, instead of processing the world, processes itself. Sleep is not passive. This is perhaps the most important thing modern sleep science has established. During sleep, particularly during the deep stages that occur in the first half of the night and the REM stages that predominate toward morning, the body is doing some of its most essential work. Memories are consolidated. Toxins are cleared from the brain by the glymphatic system, which operates primarily during sleep. Hormones are calibrated. The immune system performs maintenance that it cannot perform while the body is active and diverting resources to waking function. Matthew Walker, the neuroscientist who directs the Center for Human Sleep Science at UC Berkeley and wrote Why We Sleep in 2017, describes sleep as the most effective biological tool we have for resetting brain and body health. Not a period of doing nothing, a period of doing everything that cannot be done while you are awake. Your body knows this. It has known it far longer than science has been able to explain it. Marcus Aurelius knew a version of it. He wrote in Book 5 about the morning, the moment of waking, the natural reluctance to rise. He acknowledged that the body wants to stay in the warmth, to remain in rest, and he wrote his famous instruction to himself: "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive." But he also implicitly understood the other side of that instruction. If the morning is a privilege, the night is a preparation for it. The night is the condition that makes the morning possible. Without the body's period of self-restoration, the morning is less than it could be. The day is less than it could be. Bessel van der Kolk, in The Body Keeps the Score, describes how trauma and chronic stress disrupt the body's natural sleep architecture, how the nervous system, trained to stay alert for threats, cannot fully release into the vulnerability that sleep requires. The body that cannot rest is often the body that has learned, at some deep level, that rest is not safe. If you're someone whose mind will not stop at night, it may be worth considering not just what the mind is doing, but what the body learned at some point about the safety of letting go. Safety is here. The room is dark. The demands have stopped. Whatever threat the nervous system is still monitoring for, it is not present in this room, in this hour. Your body knows how to sleep. It has done it thousands of times. It knows the sequence, the loosening, the drift, the descent. It is waiting for the mind to stop interrupting the process. Let the body lead. It knows what to do. Your shoulders can soften, your hands can open. The muscles around your eyes, the ones you did not know were holding tension, until you feel them releasing, they can let go. Your breath is already finding its slower rhythm. The body is already beginning. Let it. Chapter 25. The mind wants dominion. Here is the payoff of what was planted early. We said in the first hours of this night that Marcus Aurelius discovered something about silence, not as the absence of sound, but as the presence of something else. We have been approaching it. The mind wants dominion. This is the key. Not peace, not rest, not clarity. The mind, by default, wants to be in charge, wants to be the organizing principle of everything, wants to take every sensation, every impression, every moment of experience and route it through its own interpretive machinery before allowing it to simply exist. This is the mind doing exactly what it was built to do. The interpreting faculty, the ruling faculty, these are extraordinary tools. Without them, you could not function in the world. You could not plan or learn or protect yourself or love with any coherence. But the mind's desire for dominion extends beyond what is useful. It wants to dominate the body's resting. It wants to dominate the silence that falls at night. It wants to be the last thing happening when everything else has stopped. It cannot bear to be unnecessary. This is why the noise. This is the hidden structure behind the Midnight Review. The looping thoughts, the inability to release what does not need to be held. The mind is exercising its dominion. It is insisting on its own relevance in an hour when its relevance has been temporarily suspended. Marcus Aurelius spent his life understanding this and working with it. He did not try to dethrone the mind. He loved thinking. He was a philosopher, a ruler, a man who lived by analysis and judgment. But he distinguished between the mind in its proper function, engaged with what it can actually do something about, and the mind in its improper function, running dominion exercises over territory it does not own. The night belongs to the body. The body's self-repair, its consolidation, its restoration. The mind is a visitor in this territory. An important visitor, a welcome one, but a visitor who needs to understand the protocol. Here, in these hours, you do not run the show. What does it mean to let the mind stand down? Not to blank it, not to meditate it into silence, not to demand that the thoughts stop, just to stop obeying it, to notice the thought and not follow it, to allow the impression without building the story, to let the ruling faculty rest from ruling just for these hours because there is nothing that requires ruling right now. The Stoics believed that the ruling faculty, properly educated, eventually finds this restful rather than threatening. The mind that has been trained to know the difference between what is its proper work and what is not can actually enjoy the suspension, can find in the release of dominion a kind of vacation from the enormous effort of being in charge. Marcus wrote in Book 9 about the mind that has found its proper limit. Not a diminished mind, a clear one that knows when to work and when to stop. Your mind has worked hard today. It has solved and sorted and evaluated and planned and worried and remembered and anticipated. It has done its work. The work is done. Tonight, the body has the watch. The mind can sleep. Let the dominion go, not permanently, just for tonight. It will be there in the morning. Everything that needs thinking about will still need thinking about. The mind will be needed, but not now, not here, not in this dark. Rest, mind. Let the body do what only the body can do. Chapter 26. Returning to nature. Marcus Aurelius was, at heart, a naturalist. Not in the modern scientific sense, though he was curious about the natural world. More in the Stoic sense, a person who believed that the human being is part of a larger whole and that the health of the individual is inseparable from the recognition of that belonging. The Stoics called this living according to nature, kata phusin, not a prescription for outdoor living or wilderness retreat. A metaphysical claim that the natural condition of the human being is participation in the rational order of the universe. And that departure from this, the driven, separated, self-enclosed condition of the anxious mind, is a kind of exile. The return to nature is the return from that exile. Marcus wrote in Book 6 about the way water, when obstructed, seeks its own level. The stream diverted eventually finds its way back to the river. The river finds its way to the sea. The movement is not forced. It is, in some sense, inevitable. Given enough time and the removal of the obstruction, the water goes where water goes. He was describing the natural movement of the mind when the obstruction of anxiety and dominion is removed. The return to quiet is not an achievement. It is what happens when you stop obstructing it. The naturalist John Muir, who spent decades in the Sierra Nevada in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and whose writing about the natural world still reads with unusual clarity, described rest in nature as not something you sought, but something you stopped preventing. He wrote that when you lie down in a meadow and go still enough, the meadow does not notice you are separate from it. You become part of the field, part of the particular quality of that afternoon in that place. Not as mysticism, as the simple consequence of stopping the effort to be distinct. Something similar is available in this room tonight. The body lying in the dark is not separate from the dark. The breath moving through the body is not different in kind from the air moving through the room. The warmth that your body generates and the warmth that the blankets hold, these are not performances. They are the natural world doing what the natural world does, which includes you. You have not been outside the natural order tonight. You have been in the middle of it. The ancient rhythms that governed life long before philosophy had a name for them, the rhythm of day and night, of effort and rest, of waking and sleeping, these are yours as surely as they were Marcus's, as surely as they are the field and the river and the spider in the garden. You belong to the natural order. The natural order wants you to rest tonight. That much is clear. The philosopher Alan Watts, who spent decades translating Eastern ideas for Western audiences in the mid-20th century, described something he called the backwards law. The more you try to force certain states of mind, the further they recede. Happiness pursued directly produces anxiety. Sleep demanded fails to arrive. Peace insisted upon generates its opposite. The return to nature, in Marcus's sense, is the removal of the insistence, the release of the demand that things be different from what they are. Not acceptance as resignation. Acceptance as the recognition that you are not separate from the natural order, that the natural order includes you, that the movement toward rest is as natural for your body as the movement of water toward the sea. There is something in you that already knows how to rest. Not learned, known from before learning. The infant's capacity to fall into sleep without strategy. The animal's release into rest without guilt. Before civilization taught you that rest must be earned and sleep must be deserved, before all that, something in you knew how to simply stop. That knowing has not been lost. It has been buried, maybe, under years of obligation and performance, and the constant measurement of whether you have done enough yet to be allowed to stop. You have done enough. Not because you accomplished everything, because the day is done and the night is here and the body belongs to its own ancient rhythm. Tonight, let the return happen, not by effort, by stopping the effort, by removing the obstruction, by allowing the natural movement that your body has been waiting to complete. The river does not decide to flow, it flows. The body does not decide to sleep. Given the conditions, it sleeps. The conditions are here. The dark, the quiet, the lying down, the release, however partial, of the day's claims. The body knows what to do next. Chapter 27, Time, Loss, and Letting Go. One of the things that was planted early in this night, Marcus wrote something in the Meditations that most people miss. A single line about what the mind does when it stops fighting. Here it is, Book 12, near the end of the journal, written in the last years of his life. Perfection of character is this: to live each day as if it were your last, without frenzy, without apathy, without pretense. This is not about dying, it is about what survives the release of fighting. When the frenzy stops, the mind stops insisting and demanding and running its dominion exercises, something remains, not nothing. Not the blank of unconsciousness. Something, that something is the character, the actual person underneath all the performance. And it is not frightening. This is what the line is saying. When the frenzy stops, the person is still there, without apathy, still caring, still present, still engaged with what actually matters. Without pretense, not performing for any audience, just the person, in the day, exactly as it is. Time, for Marcus, was not primarily a resource to be managed. It was the medium in which life happened, and the thing that made time feel scarce and precious was loss, the knowledge that it moved in one direction only, that what had passed could not be recovered, that the people and moments you valued were all, in some sense, already leaving. He lost his co-emperor and adoptive brother Lucius Verus in 169 AD. Several of his children died in infancy. His wife Faustina, whom he describes with genuine tenderness in the Meditations, died in 175 AD. He watched close advisors age and fail and go. By the time he was writing the later books, he had accumulated a significant weight of loss, and he did not deny it. He did not stoicize the loss into nothing. He felt it. What he did, the discipline, was refuse to add to the loss the further suffering of fighting its existence. The loss was real. The grief was real. The additional suffering of wanting the timeline to be different, of rehearsing all the ways the loss could have been prevented, of organizing his present life around what was absent rather than what was here, that suffering he returned to was optional. Letting go is not the same as not caring. This is what most people misunderstand about the Stoic practice. They fear that if they release their grip on what they have lost, they are saying it did not matter. But the grip does not honor what is gone. The grip is for the one who is gripping. And releasing the grip, opening the hand, as we did in an earlier chapter, does not send what was loved further away. It simply removes the pretense that holding tightly can bring it back. Helena, in the years after her husband died, described a conversation she had with herself late at night, in which she finally admitted something she had been avoiding. She said, "He's not coming back, and I've been living as if the right amount of grief might change that." The grief did not need to change. The world she had finally let herself know was as it was. And in that knowing, something loosened. Not the love. The love was not loosened. The love remained exactly where it was. But the grip on what could not be recovered, that she set down, she described it as the best night of sleep she had had in years. Time moves, loss arrives, and then, the thing that Marcus found in the last lines of his journal, life continues in the person who is still here, who is still breathing, who is still in this dark room, capable of rest. You are still here. That is not nothing. That is the whole thing. Let the hands open. Let whatever you have been holding tonight be held by the night itself for a while. The night is strong enough. It has held everything you are about to release and more. Chapter 28. The Emperor Alone at Night. We have come now to the image that the whole meditation circles around, even though Marcus never states it directly. A tent or a study, or a room somewhere in the vast administrative apparatus of Rome late at night. The Emperor alone, not performing, not governing, not being the thing the empire required him to be, just a man with a candle and a notebook and the honest work of examining what had happened in his mind that day. He wrote the meditations across many years in many places, the frontier, Rome, wherever the empire called him. Scholars believe the different books were written at different periods of his life, assembled not for publication but for personal practice. They are irregular in tone. Some passages are polished, almost ready for an audience. Others are raw, mid-argument, as if he caught himself mid-thought and wrote it down before the thought could be tidied. They are the record of a man talking to himself in the way you can only talk to yourself when no one is listening. What they reveal, and this is what makes them still read 2,000 years later, is not greatness. They reveal the ordinary interior life of an extraordinary man. The frustrations, the self-reminders, the places where he kept failing to meet his own standards, the gentleness he tried to extend to himself when he noticed this. He was alone at night with his own mind, and his own mind was not always good company. The philosopher and psychologist William James at Harvard in the late 19th century described what he called the stream of consciousness, the continuous, never quite coherent flow of thought and sensation that constitutes interior experience. It is not orderly, it is not logical, it does not present itself in well-formed arguments. It arrives in fragments and associations and sensory intrusions and old memories surfacing without apparent cause. This is what Marcus sat with, night after night, in the tent or the study, the stream. And his practice was not to stop the stream, which cannot be done, but to examine what was flowing, to notice the patterns, to catch the false impressions before they became beliefs, to return the mind gently to what was actually true. He was not serene, he was disciplined. These are not the same thing. Serenity suggests that the interior life has been pacified. Marcus's interior life was never pacified. He was always in some sense working, but the work was interior. It was the work of paying attention to what was happening in him and choosing deliberately what to do with it. This is what was available to him in the dark, alone, that was not available in the day's noise. The honesty, the unmanaged self-examination, the record that no one else would read. You are in your own version of that space right now. Not the tent, perhaps, not the candle, but the darkness and the quiet and the interior that belongs entirely to you. The thoughts that no one else is monitoring. The feelings that do not need to be explained or defended or made presentable. In this space, you do not have to be anything in particular. You do not have to have it figured out. You do not have to be the person you are required to be in the day. You can be just what you are. Here, in the dark, examined and undefended and allowed to rest. The emperor put down the pen. The lamp burned low. The night continued, unhurried, outside the tent, and he slept. If you are still awake, this is the part I wanted you to hear. You are allowed to be only what you are. The rest can wait. Chapter 29, Ancient Wisdom for Insomnia. Everything Marcus Aurelius wrote was, in some sense, a preparation for this. Not for insomnia specifically. He did not write a sleep guide. But the entire project of the meditations, the daily examination, the return to the ruling faculty, the discipline of assent, the release of what is not yours, the acceptance of what is, all of it addresses the condition that produces insomnia at its root. Insomnia is not primarily a physiological failure. It is, most often, a mind that has not yet found the boundary between what is worth its attention and what is not. A mind that cannot distinguish between the thought that requires action and the thought that requires only acknowledgement. A mind that has been trained through long habit to stay alert when alertness is no longer needed. Marcus wrote in Book 2 that the man who troubles himself about what happens after his death is troubling himself about nothing. He could have written with equal accuracy, the man who troubles himself about tomorrow's difficulties while lying in the dark is troubling himself about things that cannot be addressed tonight. This is the ancient wisdom, simple enough to state, profound enough to require a lifetime of practice. The Stoic tradition gives us a framework, but other traditions arrive at the same point through different routes. The Buddhist teacher Ajahn Chah, who taught in Thailand through the latter half of the 20th century, described the mind at night as like still water. When a stone is thrown in, ripples spread outward. If you try to stop the ripples by touching them, they multiply. But if you leave the water alone, the ripples naturally subside and the water returns to stillness. The stone is the thought. The ripples are the reaction to the thought. The stillness is what was there before the stone and what returns after the last ripple dissolves. The psychologist Russ Harris, working with acceptance and commitment therapy in the 1990s and 2000s, developed what he called cognitive diffusion, the practice of learning to see thoughts as thoughts rather than as facts. The thought, "I won't sleep tonight," is just a thought, not a prediction. not a fact, just a collection of words that the mind assembled and is now presenting as if it were a report from reality. Marcus Aurelius called this testing the impression. Harris calls it diffusion. Different centuries, different frameworks, the same practice. The practice is this: when the thought arrives, do not immediately agree with it. Notice it as a thought. It has arrived. It is not the world. It is the mind's report about the world, filtered through all the mind's habits and fears and accumulated expectations. You do not have to believe everything you think. And here is what I have been circling toward for this entire night. The shift that happens when a person stops trying to quiet the mind and starts listening to it instead. The name we planted in the early hours. The name is acceptance, but not passive acceptance, active acceptance. The kind that says, I see this thought, I see what it is doing, I am not going to fight it, and I am not going to follow it. I am going to let it be here, in this room, in this dark, without giving it the wheel. The mind, experienced this way, seen clearly, not suppressed, not obeyed, quiets on its own, not immediately, not tonight, perhaps in its entirety, but in stages. The way a child, seen and acknowledged and safe, eventually settles. You are the parent of your own mind tonight. Not the manager, the parent, with the patience that sees the noise for what it is and responds not with control, but with presence. The ancient wisdom is this: the mind that is seen does not need to be silenced. It can rest in the seeing. Chapter 30, The Softening of Control. Somewhere in the last 30 chapters, something may have begun to soften. Not the thoughts, necessarily. They may still be moving, but the grip on the thoughts, the insistence that they be different, the sense of urgency that surrounds them. This softening is what the Stoics were working toward. Not the elimination of thought or the achievement of a special state. The softening, the reduction in white-knuckle effort. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Book 4 that the universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. This is not a statement about the power of positive thinking. It is a statement about the relationship between the mind and experience. The mind that holds its thoughts tightly, that manages and controls and supervises every impression, produces one kind of life. The mind that holds its thoughts lightly, that is aware of them without being organized by them, produces another. The difference is not the external world. The external world is the same for both minds. The difference is in what the thoughts are doing to the experience of being alive. Donald Winnicott, the British psychoanalyst who worked through the mid-20th century, described a concept he called the capacity to be alone. Not the ability to tolerate aloneness, but something more active. The capacity to be genuinely present in one's own experience without requiring external support. To be with oneself without managing oneself. Most people who cannot sleep are managing themselves. They are supervising the interior, monitoring the thoughts, evaluating the feelings, determining whether the level of anxiety is acceptable or not acceptable, whether the quality of the night is meeting some standard of what a good night should be. The supervision is exhausting, and it produces the opposite of what it is trying to produce. Because the mind being supervised remains alert to the supervisor. It does not relax. How could it with someone watching? The softening of control is the moment when the supervision stops. Not a decision to stop, a recognition that the supervision was never helping, that the interior was never in danger, that the thoughts were always going to move and settle and move again, and what they needed from you was not management, but room. Thomas, who closed his notebook each night before sleep, described the moment the practice started working not as a decision, but as a tiredness. He got tired of being the accountant of his own mind. He had run the accounts for so many years, and one night, in the middle of the familiar review, he just stopped. Not deliberately. He simply ran out of the energy the supervision required. The next morning, he had slept through the night for the first time in years. He could not reproduce the tiredness on purpose. But knowing it was possible, he stopped trying so hard to reproduce it. And in that stopping, the softening became more available. This is the third and final loop we planted, and here is its resolution. The shift from trying to quiet the mind to simply allowing the mind. That shift cannot be forced. It can only be arrived at by ceasing to force, by letting the effort itself become exhausted, by getting tired of the management. Are you a little tired of the management tonight? Then let it rest. The thoughts will do what thoughts do. You have done enough supervising for today. Let your body soften where it is holding. Let your breath find its own pace. The night is running itself. You don't need to help. Chapter 31, A Philosophy of Enough. Marcus Aurelius was one of the wealthiest and most powerful human beings who had ever lived. He found it, in the end, beside the point. Not ungratefully, he acknowledged the material conditions of his life with the same clear eyes he tried to bring to everything. He had access to food, shelter, medicine, education, culture, friendship, more of all of it than most people in the empire could imagine. He was not unaware of his privilege. He simply declined to organize his contentment around it. He wrote in Book 7, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." This is not the sentiment of a man who lacked things. It is the conclusion of a man who had things and found that the having was not the thing. Not because the things were bad, but because the contentment he actually wanted did not live in them. Seneca wrote a similar thing from a similar position. He was one of the wealthiest men in Rome. He wrote about the poverty of those who had everything but were perpetually seeking more, not because they were greedy exactly, but because they had misidentified what they were actually looking for. The Stoic concept of enough is not asceticism. It is not the rejection of pleasure or comfort or material well-being. It is the clarity about what enough actually means. Enough is not a number. It is a recognition. The recognition that what you have right now, not everything you want, but what you have, is sufficient for this moment, not for all moments. This moment. Right now, in this dark room, what do you have? Not in the global sense, in the immediate sense. You have breath, you have warmth, presumably. You have a surface that holds you. You have access to ideas, to the long human tradition of trying to understand how to live well. You have the darkness itself, which is kind, which asks nothing, which covers everything, which has no agenda. This is not nothing. This is, in the most fundamental sense, a great deal. The philosophy of enough is not about gratitude as a performance, not about forcing yourself to feel thankful when you feel the opposite. It is about something more precise, the recognition that contentment, if it arrives, will arrive in the present or not at all. The future cannot give it. The past did not grant it and does not owe it. It is here, in the moment, or it is nowhere. And in this moment right now, the one that is actually happening, what would it take to find enough? Not forever, not for the life that still needs to be lived with all its outstanding questions, just for tonight, for the next few hours of dark, for the breath that is happening right now, which does not need anything to be different in order to continue. Is that enough? Only you can answer. But Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the Western world, found that it was. Night after night, in the tent, with the candle burning low, this, the breath, the page, the practice of returning to what was real. He called it enough. There is a Japanese concept, ma, that refers to the pause between things, the silence between notes in music, the gap between words in a conversation, the negative space in a painting that makes the positive space legible. Ma is not emptiness. It is the condition that allows everything else to be what it is. The philosophy of enough has something of ma in it, the recognition that the space between wanting and having, if it is inhabited rather than fled from, is not a deficiency. It is a kind of fullness. The fullness of the present, which is whole in itself regardless of what it lacks. Adam, years after learning to stop fighting the failure, described the philosophy of enough in his own language. He said, "I used to think that peace was a reward for achieving something. Now I think it is what you find when you stop making peace conditional on achievement." Marcus, reading those words across 2,000 years, would have recognized his own practice in them. The philosophy of enough is not resignation. Marcus governed an empire. He kept working. He kept seeking. He held the tension between the discipline of effort and the discipline of sufficiency. He found that they were not opposites, that the man who could rest in enough was, paradoxically, capable of more genuine effort than the man who could never quite arrive. So can you. Scripte of Chapter 32, Stillness as Strength. There is a misreading of Stoicism that sees its quiet as weakness. The man who does not react with anger, perhaps he is afraid. The man who does not chase ambition, perhaps he lacks the drive. The man who finds peace in the present, perhaps he has simply given up on the future. Marcus Aurelius spent the last quarter of his life on military campaigns. He was, by all historical accounts, an effective military commander. He waged the Marcomannic Wars for more than a decade against sustained and intelligent opposition. He was not passive. He was not fearful. He was not a man who had given up. He was a man who had learned that stillness is not the absence of strength, it is the condition from which strength can be most effectively applied. The Japanese martial tradition has a concept, zanshin, that refers to a state of relaxed alertness. The warrior who is tense is slow. The muscles required to react are the muscles that are at rest. The mind that is calm can respond to what is actually happening rather than to what it fears is happening. Zanshin is not passivity, it is the readiness beneath relaxation. Marcus, who had read Epictetus and Plato and the Stoic tradition deeply, understood this as a philosophical principle rather than a martial one. But it amounts to the same thing. The stillness he cultivated was not retirement from life. It was the ground from which his engagement with life became more precise. When he had to make a difficult judgment about a general's conduct, about a legal case, about the administration of the plague relief, he returned first to the ruling faculty, to the inner citadel, and made the judgment from there, not from anger or fear or ambition, from clarity. The judgment from clarity is almost always better than the judgment from agitation. This is not a controversial claim. Every decision-making researcher, from Daniel Kahneman at Princeton to Gary Klein studying expert judgment in the field, has found versions of this. The calm mind sees more options. The calm mind makes fewer systematic errors. The calm mind can tolerate uncertainty without converting it prematurely into false certainty. Stillness is not weakness. Stillness is the training ground for effective action. And here, at the end of this night, in the particular stillness that is available when the body is at rest and the demands have been suspended, here, this stillness is not a failure of ambition. It is preparation, the consolidation of everything the day accumulated, the quiet in which the mind processes what it cannot process in the noise, the rest that makes tomorrow possible. You are not wasting time in this darkness. You are building the capacity for everything that comes after. The tree grows in the dark as much as in the light. The roots do their essential work underground, in the cold, in the invisible. The above-ground part, the visible part, the part that performs in the daylight, depends entirely on what happens in the dark. Let this darkness be what it is, productive, necessary, yours. The historian and philosopher of science Thomas Kuhn, writing at MIT in the 1960s, described what he called the essential tension in scientific work. The balance between tradition and innovation, between the patient accumulation of evidence and the readiness for a paradigm shift. He found that the most productive scientists were often those who could hold this tension without resolving it prematurely, who could rest in uncertainty without demanding an answer before the evidence was ready. This is, in its way, a description of the stillness Marcus practiced, not the absence of readiness, the readiness that does not require the next moment to come before this one has been fully inhabited. You can be strong here, in the dark, in the not yet. You can hold the unresolved without needing it to resolve tonight. The unanswered question can remain unanswered until it can be answered. The uncertain outcome can remain uncertain until it becomes certain. You do not have to force anything tonight. The strength is in the holding, in the capacity to be here in this particular darkness, without fleeing into tomorrow or yesterday, without demanding that the present become something other than what it is. This is the quiet endurance that Marcus Aurelius practiced across 20 years of an empire that did not stop making demands. Let your body sink a little further into rest. The stillness is strength. This is what strength looks like tonight. Chapter 33, The Last Watch of Thought. The thoughts are fewer now, perhaps, or if not fewer, softer, further away. This is the natural movement of a mind that has been allowed to run its course without being fed. Without the urgency of management, without the fuel of suppression and resistance, the thoughts eventually exhaust themselves, not all of them and not forever. But for tonight, for now, they are less insistent. This is what the last watch of thought looks like. Not silence, necessarily, not blankness, but a quality of thought that is different from the earlier hours. Less personal, less urgent, more dreamlike, images that drift rather than demand, associations without conclusions, the mind loosening its grip on coherence. This is the transition zone, the borderland between waking and sleep. The researchers at sleep institutes call it hypnagogia, the state between wakefulness and sleep in which the mind produces images and sensations without the full critical apparatus of waking consciousness. Marcus Aurelius wrote about something adjacent to this in Book 9. He described the moment each evening when the mind, having examined itself, could be released. Not dramatically, a quiet letting go. The way you set down something you have been carrying for a long time, not with ceremony, just with the recognition that you no longer need to hold it. The last watch of thought is this: the few remaining thoughts that still have some momentum. They are still moving. They do not need attention. They will finish their movement on their own. The Stoics had a phrase for this moment of release, anachresis again, the withdrawal. But in the evening version, it is not a withdrawal to the inner citadel for examination. It is a withdrawal from even the examination, a release of the need to watch. The night can be trusted to continue without your oversight. The room you are in is continuing without your oversight. The temperature, the quality of the dark, the sounds that reach you or do not reach you, all of this is happening. None of it requires anything from you. None of it is asking to be managed. There is a practice in the Zen tradition called shikantaza, just sitting. Not sitting in order to achieve something, not sitting with a goal of any kind, just sitting. The quality of attention is completely open, neither grasping nor pushing away, receiving what arises without preference. The last watch of thought has something of this quality. You are not meditating. You are not performing anything. You are simply here, in the dark, with whatever is here. The thoughts that are still moving are moving. The ones that have slowed have slowed. The body that is sinking is sinking. Shunryu Suzuki, the Japanese Zen teacher who founded the San Francisco Zen Center in 1962, wrote in his book Zen Mind, "Beginner's mind, that the most important thing is to have a beginner's mind, a mind that is open, not full of its own positions and conclusions." In the last watch of thought, the mind is naturally closer to beginner's mind than at any other time of day. It is emptying. It is running out of positions. It is, almost despite itself, approaching the clean slate of sleep. You do not have to do anything to help this along. The process is already underway. The body has been managing it since you lay down. The mind is catching up. Let it catch up without interference. And the self that has been doing the managing all day, the self that examined the impressions and tested the judgments and worked the discipline, that self can also now be set down, not lost, set down. Here, in this dark, where no one requires it, it will be here in the morning. Let it rest now. Let the thoughts do what they will. They are not flying flags anymore, they are clouds. They drift. You watch them for a moment, or you do not watch them. Either way, they drift. Feel the weight of your eyelids, if there is weight there. Feel the heaviness that comes when the body has finished all its preliminary work and is ready for the deeper descent. The last thought does not announce itself. It does not say, "I am the last thought, and now we sleep." It simply happens. And then there is something else, and the something else is rest. You are close. You have been close for a while. Let the last watch be gentle. Let the thoughts drift. Let the dark hold everything. Chapter 34. Silence becomes familiar. In the earliest chapters of this night, silence may have felt like pressure. The quiet that descends when everything stops, the absence of music, of voices, of the background noise that fills the day, can feel, to a mind that has not been introduced to it, like exposure. Like the sudden awareness of your own thoughts, which you did not realize were so loud until everything else got quiet. Marcus Aurelius understood this. He had read Pascal, or rather, he had lived what Pascal wrote about, the difficulty of sitting quietly in a room, the noise that rises in the absence of external distraction, the discomfort that masquerades as boredom and is actually the encounter with the self. But something changes with time and practice. The silence, which first felt like pressure, begins to feel like companionship. Not a metaphor. A genuine shift in the quality of interior experience. The psychologist Abraham Maslow, studying what he called self-actualizing people in the 1950s and 60s, found a consistent pattern. People who had developed a high degree of interior life, who had learned to inhabit their own consciousness with some comfort, experienced solitude differently from those who had not. For the former group, solitude was restorative. For the latter, it was threatening. The difference was familiarity. The self that knows its own interior is not frightened by it. It does not need the silence filled. It can sit in the empty room and find it sufficient. You have spent several hours in the dark now. The silence that may have pressed against you earlier has perhaps become more ordinary, less urgent, less demanding. This is the familiarization, not a dramatic transformation. The slow normalization of quiet as a condition rather than a problem. The gradual recognition that the silence does not require you to produce something. It does not want anything from you. It is simply the absence of noise. And the absence of noise is in itself a kind of gift. Marcus, writing in his tent in the last years of his life, with the certainty of his own death becoming more present, he had survived the plague, he had survived the wars, but he was aging and he knew it. Wrote about silence with a warmth that surprises readers who expect only austerity. He found in silence not emptiness, but room. Room for the actual thoughts rather than the obligatory ones. Room for the feelings that the noise kept at bay. Room for the awareness that underneath all the management and the discipline and the work, there was something that had always been there, quiet, waiting to be noticed. He did not give it a name exactly, but it was not nothing. It is here, now, in this room, in this dark. The thing that is here when everything else has been set down. The part of you that has been present through all of it, through all the chapters, through all the years before this night, through everything you have been and done and said and thought. The silence has become familiar enough, perhaps, to feel like a home of sorts. Rest here. You have been here before. You will be here again. The psychologist Winnicott, who gave us the concept of the capacity to be alone, spent his career studying what he called the holding environment, the conditions under which a person can be themselves without the anxiety of performance. For an infant, the holding environment is the mother's presence. For the adult, it can be many things: a trusted friendship, a long marriage, a practice of meditation, a room that has become familiar enough to feel safe. The dark of this room tonight is a holding environment. It holds you without requiring anything of you. It has no agenda. It does not evaluate whether you are sleeping correctly or feeling the right things or arriving at peace on schedule. It simply holds. The walls are where they are. The ceiling is where it is. The dark is the dark. You can rest in that holding. You do not have to produce the sleep. The holding will do what holding does. It creates the conditions. The sleep comes on its own. Richard found his holding environment in the garden, that small patch of predictable ground where the spider built its web and the flower opened between 7 and 8 each morning. Not because the garden was dramatic, because it was reliably, quietly itself. Day after day, the same unhurried, continuity. This room is that tonight, reliably, quietly itself. The silence has become familiar. The dark has become familiar. You have been here long enough that the strangeness of the early hours has softened into something more like recognition. This is your night. This is your quiet. This is the quiet that does not ask anything of you. Chapter 35. Rest inside the present. There is only now. This is not a slogan. It is the most concrete fact available to you at this moment. The past is memory, real, but gone. The future is anticipation, possible, but not yet. What is present, what is actual, what is here, without any further construction needed, is this: the moment you are in. Marcus Aurelius returned to this again and again in the final books of the Meditations. Book 12 is particularly condensed. It reads like a man who has spent years circling a central truth and is finally saying it directly, without ornamentation. He writes that the present moment is the only territory a human being actually inhabits. Everything else, the past, the future, the vast empire of plans and regrets and projections, exists in the mind alone. The present is where the body is, where the breath is, where the actual experience of being alive is occurring. This is not a consolation prize. It is the whole thing. The philosopher Epictetus, in the Discourses, described a man who could not sleep because he was worrying about what might happen next year. Epictetus's response was not to reassure him about next year. It was to ask, where are you right now? Because next year is not here. You are here. And here has not asked anything of you that you cannot meet. The present moment is almost always survivable. The present moment almost never contains everything it fears. The present moment has the breath, has the dark, has the body in some condition of rest, has, if you let it, the quiet that does not demand. The pain is often in the distance, the retrospective or the anticipatory distance. The regret that is not happening now but lives in memory. The fear that is not happening now but lives in projection. The present, cleared of these distances, is usually much simpler than the distances make it seem. This is what was planted in Chapter 6, when we talked about what happens when a person stops trying to quiet the mind and starts allowing it. The shift is into the present, not a destination, an arrival at where you already are. The present does not require your silence, it simply requires your presence. And presence, this is the final simplification, is already happening. You are already here. You have never left. The noise was happening here, the practice was happening here. The drift towards sleep, if it is happening here. There is nowhere to get to. You are already in the only place where rest lives. Let your breath be where it is. Let your body be where it is. Let the dark be the dark, and the quiet be the quiet. This is it. This is the present. This is enough. You do not have to do anything with it. You just have to be in it. You already are. Chapter 36. The quiet mind remains. We began tonight in a dark room. Your mind was loud. Not because something was wrong with you, because that is what minds do when the day has asked everything of them and the night has finally arrived and there is nothing left to perform for. The silence descended, and the mind, unused to silence, uncertain what to do without a task, generated its own noise. And then we walked together through 21 centuries of accumulated wisdom about this condition. Marcus Aurelius, alone in his tent at the Danube, writing to himself that the mind can find its way back. Epictetus, in the small stone room of a former slave, discovering that the interior cannot be owned by any external force. Seneca, in his letters to Lucilius, mapping the terrain of a well-lived life with the precision of someone who knows he is running out of time. The philosophers who came after, the teachers, the psychologists, the contemplatives who found, through different routes, the same essential clearing. And somewhere along the way, the mind you brought into this night may have softened. The thoughts may have slowed. The breath may have deepened. The body, which always knew what to do, may have begun what only the body can begin. The quiet mind does not arrive by conquest. It was never conquered. It was there underneath the noise all along. This is what Marcus discovered in that cold room, in the tent, in the years of discipline that produced the meditations. The quiet was not something he built, it was something he uncovered. Something that had always been there, beneath the impressions and the reactions and the stories, waiting patiently for him to stop looking for it somewhere else. It is in you in the same way. It has been in you through every chapter of this night, through every year before this night, through the long journey that brought you here, to this bed, to this dark, to this moment. The room where we began is still dark. The ceiling is still there if you look at it. The night is still doing what nights do, holding everything in its quiet, enormous patience. And you are here. The mind that was running has perhaps slowed enough to let the rest come. The body that was braced has perhaps softened enough to let the night do its work. There is one more thing, the last line, not a command, a recognition. All of the thinkers we walked through tonight, Marcus, Epictetus, Seneca, Frankl, Jung, Camus, Thich Nhat Hanh, all the others who spent their lives trying to understand how to inhabit a human life with something like grace, they all arrived by different paths at the same place. Not happiness, exactly. Not certainty. Not the resolution of all difficulty. Presence. The calm that comes not from the absence of noise, but from the mind that has learned to be still inside the noise. The quiet that does not need the world to change before it can exist. You are not broken because your mind was loud tonight. You are human. And being human means inheriting both the noise and the capacity for this, for finding in the dark the place beneath the noise where something quiet and unbreakable has always lived. It is there. It has always been there. It is what you return to every night, whether you know it or not. Tonight, you knew it. Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD on the Danube frontier, still governing, still attending to the work. He left behind no monuments except the journal he never meant for us to read. 2,000 years later, that journal is still read. Not because Marcus was perfect, because he was honest about the effort, the daily return, the continuous practice, the refusal to pretend that equanimity was easy. The quiet mind is not a destination, it is a direction. A direction you have been traveling tonight and will travel again. Every night you lie down in the dark is an opportunity to practice what Marcus practiced, to examine what arrived, to set down what is not yours to carry, to let the body do what only the body can do, to allow the quiet that has always been there to be, for these hours, a little more present than the noise. You do not arrive there permanently. You keep returning. And the returning is the practice. The returning is the point. The quiet mind remains after everything. Sleep now.